Good morning. We're going to start our hearing this morning. As many of you may know, Assemblymember Carter, who chairs this committee, has been out on medical leave. She's doing very well and sends her regrets for not being here. And in her absence, I will be presiding over today's hearing, and I certainly am honored to do so and thank her for extending the gavel to me for today. Today's hearing will focus on the governor's special session proposals for K-12 and higher education. As we all know, we're in the 8th extraordinary session to address approximately $6.6 billion of a general fund deficit for the current year. The task before the subcommittee today is to identify the specific education issues in the governor's proposed budget that require immediate legislative action in order to address this current projected year deficit. While the LAO today will provide a sort of a high-level overview of both the current year and the budget year, I'd like to ask those who are testifying today to try to keep focused on what the current year issues are. The subcommittee will be obviously addressing the budget year in considerable detail over the next few months. So we will begin with a presentation on K-12 and child care issues and entertain questions and public comment on those issues as we proceed. And so we will begin with issue number 1, the Proposition 98 overview, and we have Edgar Cabral and Jennifer Kuhn from the Legislative Analyst's Office and Nick Schweitzer from the Department of Finance. So please begin, the LAO. Oh, I'm reminded that I should call roll. It looks like we have a quorum, so I will do that.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
Present.
Berryhill. Here. Carter. Chesbrough. Here. Fuller. Swanson.
And I guess before we should begin, if anybody has any opening comments, any of the members? No? All right, then we'll proceed with the LAO's presentation.
Okay. Edgar Cabral with the Legislative Analyst's Office. And there's a handout that's being passed out to you right now where we go over issues 1 and 2, so the Proposition 98 proposals for K-12 and for child care. Although this is a special session hearing and we're talking about specific proposals, it's really important to understand the overall Prop 98 approach that the governor is taking to really understand why these specific actions are being proposed. So we are going to walk through a lot of that at first. So we want to talk about different ways that you can look at the governor's plan, the governor's Prop 98 approach, and then how that proposal relates to our federal maintenance of effort requirements for the ARA. And then we'll talk about our assessment and some of the initial special session proposals.
Great. Thank you.
So on page 1, we have just quickly describing 3 different ways to look at the governor's plan, and I'll walk through those briefly. These are all sort of different ways to slice or to frame the proposals and to give you a sense of what's going on at the state and the local levels. And going over to page 2, we talk about Proposition 98 budget solution, and this is the number that the governor has said that there is a $20 billion problem and that education is contributing $2.4 billion in solution. Now, this is very important for those who are tracking from the governor's estimate of the problem and trying to determine how much solution we're getting, but it's not necessarily clearly tied to the effect that school districts will see from these proposals. We show you this information just so that you can get a sense of when the governor is saying that there are $2.4 billion in solution, how that is being scored and what the methodology is for doing that. So the governor creates this workload budget, this hypothetical workload budget. This is what would happen if there were no action, and then says we are scoring $2.4 billion in solution based on our actions. We are estimating that the Prop 98 minimum guarantee would decrease by $2.4 billion as a result. And that includes 3 things that we describe here on the page. First, there are some changes to the governor's essentially accounting for in the 2008-9 budget for Proposition 98, which results in $1.9 billion in savings, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. The second thing is that the governor eliminates the sales tax on gasoline And that reduces general fund revenues for the purposes of calculating Proposition 98 and results in roughly $800 million in savings. And the final thing is a shift in redevelopment agency fund property taxes that were going to be provided to schools that are now being shifted out. That's actually a general fund essentially cost in education because the general fund picks up the tab. But overall, these things add up to $2.4 billion. Going on to the next page, we show you just strictly Proposition 98 funding. So we're looking at this table here shows you the Prop 98 funding from 2007-8 through to 2010-11 under the governor's proposals. And I would direct you to the row titled Totals Proposition 98, and that's the third from the bottom there. And it shows you Proposition 98 funding in each year over that period. And as you can see, from 2009-10 to 2010-11, education is virtually flat. It's roughly $103 million for Proposition 98. It's a very small increase. So essentially, the proposal is keeping Prop 98 flat over the 2-year period. On the next page, we give you a different look. This is what we call our programmatic funding table. And here we're trying to show you what we think the effect would be at the local level. So not just looking at Proposition 98 funding that the state provides, but looking at overall what's the district going to feel based on the governor's proposals. Although the state made significant reductions in 2008-9 and 2009-10 to Proposition 98 funding, there were a variety of one-time funds that were provided to help mitigate. Also, districts received significant funding from the federal government through the ARA, through the stimulus, and those dollars helped mitigate some of those effects. As you can see from our table, and I direct you to the bottom row that shows the percent change from 2007-8, we do anticipate that in 2010-11, under the governor's proposal, school districts would be facing about an 11% cut compared to what they were receiving in 2007-8. And that reduction is primarily because although there were Prop 98 cuts in 8-9 and 9-10, there were significant one-time funds available. By 10-11, we don't expect very much one-time funds to be available. Some federal money will exist at in some school districts, but not all. And this is our attempt to show you kind of a statewide look at sort of the average school district, but obviously this could vary significantly based on our district's decisions, particularly with federal ARA funds. They may have chosen to spend them in 8-9 and 9-10, and there might not be any available in 10-11. On the other hand, they also could have saved it, and maybe they wouldn't be taking as big of a cuts. But this is kind of just our attempt to give you a statewide view of what's going on. Okay. Then moving on to the next page, here we're getting into now some of the details of the governor's plan. The governor's plan really gets savings because the governor is taking a different approach to Proposition 98 than what was in the July budget. And all of this difference is primarily due to the uncertainty that was created because of, or uncertainty that exists related to what we call a maintenance factor obligation in Proposition 98. So to try to describe the maintenance factor in a brief way, the maintenance factor is essentially a long-term obligation created by Proposition 98 for K-14 education. So Proposition 98 generally grows with the economy, with per capita personal income. Some years, though, the state does not have enough money to provide that, and so Proposition 98 allows the state to provide less than that, but to keep track of essentially what you didn't provide, and requires the state to pay additional funds in future years, so that eventually you get back to where you would have been if you had provided growth with the economy. This does not require you to essentially, you don't have to pay back the money for a very specific year. Just eventually in the long term, you will get back to that level that you would have been. There was a difference of opinion about whether you created this obligation in the 2008-9 year. And in the July budget, there was a resolution that was compromised, and the July budget statutorily declared that there was an $11.2 billion maintenance factor obligation at the end of the 2008-9 year. Then the budget deal then just specified that these payments would be made according to the Constitution, and there is a formula in the Constitution that tells you essentially how much you have to pay in maintenance factor every year. If you did owe an $11.2 billion obligation, you would have to make some payments in 2009-10 and 2010-11. the governor's approach does not acknowledge a maintenance factor obligation. So moving into 9, 10, 10, 11, they don't have any. They have $0 in maintenance factor owed, and as a result, they have lower payments, lower Proposition 98 minimum guarantee requirements in 9, 10, and 10, 11, and that's where they that's how they are able to make reductions in those years and still meet the minimum requirements of Prop 98. The governor does promise to pay $11.2 billion in payments to education in the future, but those would not begin until 2011-12. Now, moving on to the next page, we try to give you a sense of what we think the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee would have been had you entered the 2019 year with a maintenance factor obligation of 11.2. And this is essentially our attempt to sort of show you what we think the July budget agreement essentially would have required. And as you can see from the chart, there would be significant increases in the minimum requirement. We think that in 2009-10, if you did owe a maintenance factor obligation, you would have a minimum guarantee of $52 billion, significantly higher, $2.2 billion higher than under the governor's proposal. And similarly, in 2010-11, we have a minimum guarantee of $53.2 billion, which is $3.2 billion higher than the governor's proposal. So whether you owe this obligation or not has a big effect on your minimum requirement. And it's really the only reason why the governor can propose special session reductions is because under their approach, the minimum guarantee has fallen compared to July. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to make reductions. You would actually have to provide a little bit more. On the next page, we talk about the federal requirements related to ARA. And
wondering if we want to pause here.
Sure.
Before we get into an entirely different issue, and maybe hear from the Department of Finance up to this point, and then start talking about the MOE requirement.
Sure. Nicholas Schweitzer, Department of Finance. I'll just maybe make 4 clarifying points onto Mr. Cabril's testimony, which has been fairly accurate. But just well accurate. I just want to emphasize some things, or maybe put the or sort of maybe inform them by our point of view on some of them. Okay, first of all, the $2.4 billion in cuts that we referred to in terms of the amount we're reducing Prop 98 by, I think we would point out, as Mr. Cabral said, that there is level funding for Prop 98 for the most part year over year. The $2.4 billion is mostly growth that would have occurred. So those are increases on top of what is currently being provided for Prop 98. The other point is, again, since the $2.4 billion is growth, certainly in the prior year and the current year in our special section reductions, we're not proposing to actually cut programs. Is savings that would occur on the natural, mostly in class size reduction, and monies that if Prop 98 were to grow would need to be appropriated, but since we are not proposing to grow Prop 98, would therefore do not need to be appropriated. Also, the budget year cuts, they are for the most part are turning what were one-time cuts in the current year into ongoing cuts. So again, it's really level funding for Prop 98 over from the prior year through the current year to budget year. The final point is, the administration recognizes that $11.2 billion should be repaid to schools. We may have a problem with some issues around when maintenance factor is generated or not generated, but we do recognize that $3.2 billion should be repaid to schools, and we are just proposing to delay repayment, the beginning of the repayments by a year because of the extreme difficulties that continue to persist in the budget.
Thank you. So I think that, well, I'll ask first if other members have questions. I think certainly when you say that we're making cuts and at the same time saying that we're not accounting for sort of any growth and just reallocating from the previous year, it's sort of, to me, that doesn't necessarily kind of pencil out in some sense. And but I guess from the governor's perspective, while we last year, part of the budget solution and agreement last year was we agreed statutorily to this $11.2 billion worth of maintenance, the maintenance factor. And as the LAO said, by that commitment, what would happen from there based on the constitutional law of the maintenance factor is that there would begin in this year and the years following payments on the maintenance factor. But the governor's proposal, and I understand the stresses, obviously, of this year's budget, but the governor has chosen, to me it sounds like he's chosen not to oblige that agreement, but to say he's going to pay later down the road, but not pay now. And I think you're saying that he's doing that because you believe that there's really no other way in which to manage that maintenance factor in the current year and the out years? Or is it just focused on just trying to keep, as you said, revenue completely flat? So if you make any contribution, that's going to increase in the out years what the Prop 98 requirement would be.
First of all, I can't really speak to the agreement. There is some confusion as to what was agreed to and what wasn't agreed to. But certainly the administration did agree to the $11.2 billion in payments, and under normal circumstances they would have begun in the current year. We are not proposing to begin them in the current year or the budget year for both the reasons that you said. We certainly, the administration certainly wanted to, not reduce Prop 98 spending, but at the same time that the budget certainly did not allow us to increase Prop 98 spending.
So can you just clarify for us what the confusion is around the maintenance factor agreement?
Well, again, as you said, some folks feel that the agreement was that, maintenance factor, should start being paid in the current year. That's not our understanding of the agreement, or so that's my
your understanding is
my understanding of what people's understanding was. So this is one at least one person removed.
Right. So but your understanding, I guess, is that the commitment was to in essence repay the 11.2 maintenance factor, but not necessarily when.
Right.
Got it. Okay. And the LAO, you talked about when the governor was creating his proposal and looking particularly at this Prop 98 solution, you talked about development of a workload budget and then working from there. What do you mean by that? I mean, I've been here for 3 years. My first year here, we talked about a workload budget that reflected what the real cost of educating our children would be and the real cost of doing business. Is that, when you talk about a workload and building up from that, is that the kind of workload budget that you're talking about?
Now, my understanding about what the workload budget was is that it was the administration's opinion about what the budget deal had. So that, as Nick mentioned, that involved maintenance factor payments beginning, I believe, in 2010-11. But it's completely removed from the cost of education. Our idea of what the cost of education was. It was just what they think the minimum guarantee would have been absent the new proposals that they're proposing in January, is if they continued the July budget agreement, what would the minimum guarantee be? And then they are proposing reductions. They're proposing changes that would result in reductions in both the current year and the budget year. And I don't know if you want to comment about whether I'm reflecting that correctly.
Sure. As Mr. Cabral said, it was our sort of our estimate of the amount Proposition 98 would grow by, based on the legislation that was enacted in July.
Okay. And just for a question for the LAO, so on this maintenance factor, if I just want to be clear, so if we delay payment of the maintenance factor, and say we delay it for a couple of more years before we begin to start repaying that, at the point in which we would have paid the full amount, 11.2, is there any, I just want to make sure that if you delay it, I know that there's a loss for schools in the next year because of the way the formula would be calculated. But over a period of time, however many years it takes to pay back the maintenance factor, in essence, at that point in time, is there any loss?
Yeah, I mean, the way we think that Proposition 98, obviously there are disagreements about the way everybody thought Proposition 98 was supposed to work, but at least as our understanding goes, over a really, really long-term period, say in 20 years, we do expect that you would be at about the same level, regardless of whether you started paying now or started paying in 2 or 3 years. However, in the meantime, while you're restoring payments, while you're paying off your maintenance factor, during that period, if you delay payments, you're then providing less to education in that period. And, because this is an $11.2 billion maintenance factor obligation, that, delaying those payments could result, this is going to be paid over a very long period of time if it's paid. And so it would be multiple years that perhaps school districts and community colleges would be receiving less funding as a result of delaying the payments.
Okay. And then on the page number 3, when you're pointing out that the funding is virtually flat. Wait, yeah. No, but where's
the next page? Where you see this, right? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. So yeah, on page 3, talk about how it's flat. Then over on page 4, talking about the the difference in the 2010-11 being 11%. And I think you said it was an average look. So the 11% is not necessarily what each school district is going to be potentially looking at from your perspective. But still looking at at this chart and what I hear from school districts, it doesn't seem to really sort of line up. And so I just wondering if there's any further comment relative to that. I mean, for me, it seems as though we've made more significant cuts to schools than what this chart reflects. And then, of course, the 11%, albeit that it's presented as sort of an average, but still doesn't seem to be what reflects what the kind of hit and cuts the schools districts are actually taking.
Yeah, I mean, this is our best guess, our best attempt to reflect what's going on and trying to show what's going on statewide. And so obviously there may be some districts who can be facing significant reductions. Some of these, some reductions were very across the board. Other reductions may have hit specific districts harder than others. So there could be very different situations in each particular district. That being said, we do think overall statewide this is a pretty fair picture of what we think is going on. A lot of the reductions in 8-9 and 9-10 were mitigated by some one-time funding, by federal funding. But we do think, part of the reason we use this table is because, as we mentioned in the previous table, funding is flat if you just look at Prop 98 funding. And so you would think there's not going to be much of a difference in terms of what program districts will be running in 10-11 versus 9-10. But we do think that when you start to take a look at federal funds, at other one-time funds, there will be a significant reduction in the size of school district programs in 10-11 statewide. It could vary. It's going to vary significantly from district to district, but we do think that there will be a reduction despite the fact that Prop 98 funding looks flat.
And stimulus money is only for 3 years. That's the maximum school districts can over a 3-year time
Right.
period.
They have authority to use those funds in 8-9, 9-10, and 10-11.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Mr. Berryhill.
So, let me get this straight. In statute, there is no time frame for when maintenance factor has to be paid off. You can legitimately push that down the road.
Well, that's where there's a difference. If you acknowledge that this obligation is a maintenance factor obligation, then it is a Proposition 98 obligation. It's a constitutional obligation, and in that situation, there's a formula in Proposition 98 that tells you how much you're supposed to pay every year, and that formula, the payment increases or decreases depending on the general fund condition. So when general fund is growing pretty healthy, then the payment will increase.
Comes in faster,
right?
Accelerated,
right? So that's just
slow. It's decelerated.
Right, that's right, and there is no. Unless the legislature chooses to suspend Proposition 98, there is really no way to get around that payment. That payment is required, and you have to make the payment. That's if you acknowledge that it was a maintenance factor obligation. Right. The administration is saying that it's not. They don't believe it's an obligation required by the Constitution. However, they are promising to make that payment, and there is an agreement to pay it statutorily. But because it's a statutory agreement and not a Prop 98 agreement, then there is more flexibility in when you pay that off, when you can delay. Okay. We don't think that if it was considered a constitutional requirement, you could delay the payment.
Okay. For the administration, are the numbers in 10-11, we fall off pretty drastically. Are those payments that you're pushing to 10-11 reflected in that? No. So what I'm thinking is that maybe it does make sense to push maintenance payments back to 10 and 11 to soften the blow of that year and probably the following year.
I think if you're looking at Mr. Cabrol's handout, I think the reason why the payments fall off or the amounts fall off substantially is because of the federal funds. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is the ARA funds go away. The issue that we're going to have is fitting additional maintenance factor payment in 10-11 into the budget. The statutory language that was adopted in July originally had the maintenance factor, or the in lieu maintenance factor payment starting in 10-11. However, we could not accommodate that in the current budget.
And why is that? Why can you say you can't accommodate that in the current budget to pay a maintenance factor in 10-11?
It's basically the where revenues are and where other spending priorities are.
From the governor's perspective.
Correct.
Okay, just want to be clear on that.
Jennifer Kuhn from the Ledge Analyst Office. So the terminology will become important. So if the state were to decide it doesn't have a maintenance factor payment, that it's just a statutory agreement, sort of world of opportunities will open before you as to how you want to pay it, when you want to pay it, how much you want to pay it. A formula no longer has to govern how you pay it. So if you were to choose to pay $1 billion of it in 10-11, that would be within your purview. Alternatively, if you think it's truly a maintenance factor payment, then this formula is going to be very constraining on how much when you pay. So, and under certain circumstances, you might find that maybe it's too difficult to build a budget given that constraint, and suspension would be needed. So just the terminology and the agreement and understanding obviously is important.
Is it really just a matter of opinion?
Yes, I believe
what Prop
it is
98
a matter
says?
of an opinion.
It's not Prop 98 is not clear about it?
Well, I think the statutory agreement that we made last year was, depending on your perspective of things, and was an agreement that said we are going to recognize that there is a maintenance factor. There was discussions then whether we were in test 1 or test 3, and the constitutional what the interpretation of what the Constitution said. And so we said to resolve that, we're going to make a statutory agreement on the maintenance factor. And so I think for many of us, when you agree and make that commitment, you're saying it comes with all the constitutional requirements, which is to say, that you will begin to start paying the maintenance factor under certain conditions, of which the conditions are here. And so I think what the governor is now saying, no, in his proposal, he interprets what that statutory agreement is differently and says, no, we're going to agree to pay it at some point in time. And it may be way down the road somewhere, but we're not going to begin to start making those payments at this time. And so I guess, is it a question where, again, the legislature has to sort of weigh in on not so much the mechanics of the budget, but of this policy decision to say, this is what we thought we were agreeing to, and we need to clear that up, or we make some other agreement that clarifies it. So that will, I think, be a very significant question that we're going to have to answer as we move along on this process. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll move on then to the maintenance of effort issue, just to keep everybody's brain cells going.
Yes. So now we're on page 7 of the handout, and here we're just trying to show you, now that we've sort of talked a little bit about how the governor gets to his funding levels, show you how the funding levels relate to the federal maintenance of effort requirements from the federal stimulus. So as you may know, the federal government provided billions of dollars in one-time funds through the ARA. Now, as a condition of receiving some of these funds, there was a requirement that the state needed to spend at least the amount it spent in 2005-06 in every year that the state could use these funds. So in 8, 9, 9, 10, and 10, 11. And this is called the maintenance of effort level. So the state needs to keep spending above that maintenance of effort level so that it doesn't violate federal requirements. In the July budget for the 2009-10 year, the state was approximately $125 million above that maintenance of effort requirement. Now, as part of these mid-year special session proposals, the governor is proposing to make reductions to K-12 education. These reductions, absent any other action, would then put the state below the maintenance of effort requirement in 2009-10. So in order to stay above that level, the administration is proposing a fund shift, essentially a prepayment of the QEI program. Typically, the QEI program, the first payment for the program is in October of a fiscal year. And so for the 2010-11 year, the QEI program, there would be a payment sent out in October of 2010. The administration is proposing to make that payment in June of 2010 so that it counts as a 2009-10 payment to schools and funding available in 9-10, and then that would maintain the state above the maintenance of effort requirements in the 9-10 year. So it's essentially it's an early payment to make sure that the state meets the obligations for this specific year. And that's part of what is here before you. One of the special session actions that the governor's proposed that would require action by the legislature to make sure that happens, so that that payment would occur in the 9-10 year and the state would stay above the requirements.
So that is a specific special session request, that we would approve this QIA payment in June to suffice the the maintenance of effort requirement.
Right.
Okay.
And obviously that, that payment is needed if you're going to make these special session reductions as well. So the only reason why this payment needs to be paid early is because there are special session reductions proposed, and that puts the state below the requirements. So if you only need to make this if you have to make the decision about whether you want to make these additional reductions before you decide whether you need to make the QI agreement.
So it's a much bigger decision.
Right.
It's not as simple as just making this one QIA decision. Okay, thank you.
So on the next page, we talk about the 2010-11 issue. So in 2010-11, the governor's proposal does fail to meet the maintenance of effort requirement. Now, there is, in the federal law, there is a waiver that states can apply for and get so that they can be allowed to spend less than that maintenance of effort level. And the way that the federal government determines if you're eligible for the waiver is to say that your state support for education needs to be the same or higher in a given year so that you can qualify. So for moving from 9-10 to 10-11, you need to be spending the percentage of your expenditures is the way that the governor's office has applied for, has to stay steady or increase. That's sort of the first level to make sure that you even qualify for the waiver.
What's the dollar amount that counts, or the percentage of the general fund that counts?
It's the percentage that counts. Now, under the preliminary, the governor's office has indicated to the Department of Education that they will need a waiver, and under the preliminary estimates, they would qualify. They would meet the requirements of the waiver, so they would be allowed to spend. The state would be allowed to spend less than the maintenance of effort requirement, and it would be necessary under the governor's proposal. And again, this is another issue where really your decisions on other things really affect whether you need to be concerned about this. If for some reason you were to provide more funding and you were able to meet those requirements, then this would not be something that you need to be particularly concerned about.
But the maintenance of effort formula is you can either look at a percentage of expenditures or a percentage of revenue, and the governor chooses to look at a percentage of expenditures, right?
That's right. The federal law says, I believe federal law says you need to look at the percentage of revenues, but then when you look at the federal guidance, it says instead of revenues, you can use expenditures. And the governor's office has applied for using the expenditure numbers, and they would qualify under those.
So the spirit, it's fair to say, is to look at the revenue, which really in the calculation would be looking at a higher level of spending in education versus revenue being hopefully higher than expenditure. So, but as you say, as you move through the regulations, from your perspective, it would be appropriate for the calculation to be done from the expenditures.
Right. The federal guidance does allow you to do that.
Okay. And so when you say then we should be okay with regards to the maintenance of effort, does the federal government give us, some letter that says you're looking okay, don't worry, everything's fine?
Well, my understanding, and the Department of Finance can clarify if I'm wrong, is that the state has essentially notified the federal government that they may need a waiver, and the federal government has said, okay, we understand, and you go ahead and proceed. And then final approval of the waiver wouldn't really happen until almost 2 years from now, once the 10-11 year has ended. They give you preliminary approval, and then when the 10-11 year ends, and then you get your final data, how much did you spend on education, how much did you spend on the rest of the budget, then they sort of finally verify that you have actually met the waiver requirements. And
so there's sort of a level of uncertainty as we go through this process. Given that level of uncertainty, do we know of other states that have gone, through this process, and then, at the end of their process, indeed, the federal government did give them the waiver?
Yeah, we know that I believe 11 states have applied for a waiver of either because they failed to meet K-12 requirements or higher ed requirements of the MOE. I believe it's 2 that have received approval of the waiver, and these are states who applied for a waiver, even in 2008-9. So that they're more far along in the process than the state of California would be if it was applying for a waiver in 10-11.
Okay, and then the other states haven't just because they haven't gone through the time frame, or they haven't because there might be some glitch in their request?
I'm not sure about that. We can double check and see if there are some who've had some glitches, but I think a lot of the requests have been for sort of later 9, 10, or 10, 11, and so they might not have been as final as those who apply for an 8, 9. But we can check that and let you know.
Okay. And from the finance perspective, I mean, is there anything more that you can add on this process and what your sort of level of certainty? Certainty is?
Certainly we're very confident that we qualify for the waiver. Our communications so far with the U.S. Department of Ed have been very positive. We have submitted a waiver request along with our application for the next round of funding, and the indications, although it hasn't been approved yet, the feds are going through applications right now. They have indicated to us that we do appear to qualify, and we will be getting the next round of state fiscal stabilization funds. I think the reason for the delay in the final approval of the waiver is that the feds would prefer to see actual data at the end of the year to verify that we haven't indeed done what we said we were going to do.
Right. Okay, but is this a special session request? No, the MOU is just, that has nothing to do with special session, right? Right, okay, all right.
So the point of determination of whether or not we receive the waiver is when? I mean, what's the...
My understanding is that the feds are going to wait until after the end of the fiscal year to see our actual data. We actually are.
But then on the other hand, we are budgeting based on assumptions that
Correct.
We do have it.
Yeah, that's correct. So it definitely is. So at the end of the year, when we finally have made a finalized budget and gone through that budget, then the federal government will say, yeah, or no.
Yeah. Now, if they say no, we have to ante up more money.
Right.
Correct?
I think
risk
from the
losing
Federal.
Yeah.
From the state's perspective, there are really two important issues to keep in mind. One, either stay above the MOE level or meet the waiver requirement. And if you do one of those things, then you sort of have made the best effort possible to adhere to the federal guidance. So to the extent you stay above the MOE, things are pretty straightforward. To the extent you need the waiver, then it's really a consideration for you as you build your budget to keep this in mind, to make sure that this balance of spending on education and non-education is meeting this requirement.
Well, certainly, having gone through the last few months with Race to the Top, and while I haven't read these regulations, I certainly became familiar with Race to the Top regulations, and it became quite clear that many of those regulations were a matter of interpretation, and they weren't regulations that were necessarily, in all cases, completely black or white. So it wouldn't be that you would be able to walk away and say, oh, I've read this, I've highlighted here, I'm absolutely clear that we're doing everything that we need to do to get, this final approval. So it is sort of a tenuous place to be in. So I guess the solution is to stay above the the maintenance of effort, and then we will be absolutely sure that that provides that level of certainty that we may need in the longer run. So anyway, okay, so we'll move on.
Okay, moving on to page 9, we give you our just very initial assessment of the Prop 98 plan that the governor is proposing. Really, the big issue is that there are several major risks. And as we've talked about regarding maintenance factor, there are a lot of assumptions that if they could change would significantly increase the minimum requirement in 2009-10 and 2010-11. So if even if final 2008-9 data were adjusted and there could be changes in Prop 98, that would change the guarantee. As we mentioned before, also the elimination of the sales tax on gasoline has an effect on the Proposition 98 requirement. If that was not eliminated, that would increase the the minimum guarantee in 2010-11. If the legislature were to adopt other revenue increases, or if there were other revenues to trigger, the governor's proposal has $2.3 billion in what we call revenue triggers, if the state does not receive $6.9 billion in federal funding, a variety of things happen. There are some spending reductions and these revenue triggers. If those revenues were to trigger, then the minimum guarantee would also increase. So these are a lot of things to keep in mind. And again, the different interpretations of the Constitution about whether we owe this maintenance factor or not would significantly change your guarantee. So given all these risks, we do think the legislature may want to wait until it has better information to really make Proposition 98 decisions. There are a lot of moving pieces. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we don't think that any of them are so crucial that they need to be dealt with in the special session in order to achieve additional savings or to help with the state's fiscal situation. These are things that can be dealt with throughout the year, and maybe some would need to, we'll go over some of them more specifically, but some may need to be dealt with before the close of the 9-10 fiscal year, but we do think that nothing needs to be done within the special session.
Okay. There seems, certainly from my vantage point, there seems that there's a couple, and I hear the recommendation, and it seems, to me to be a good one. And there also seems to be some sort of unprecedented things that are happening here. One is certainly kind of the issue of going back into previous years and claiming savings to reduce the Prop 98 guarantee. I'm not sure when we've done that before. Another is the maintenance factor, sort of saying, declaring that there is a maintenance factor and then really not following the constitutional guidelines for the maintenance factor. And I want to confirm that what I believe to be true is that and this might not be unprecedented, I'm not sure, but the QIA, the way QIA is funded, normally QIA is funded outside of Prop 98 dollars. It's funded through general fund dollars, but in these proposals, the QIA is paid within the Prop 98 dollars.
That's for the 9-10 fiscal year, and that's consistent with what was adopted in the July budget.
Okay.
Yeah, but for 10-11, the program goes back to the way it already was.
Okay. All right. And then, let's see, where are you going from here? You're going to, okay. All right.
So moving on, here we go to page 10, and we itemize some of the specific special session proposals. The first two are really related to the Prop 98 issues, whether you want to acknowledge that a maintenance factor obligation exists or doesn't exist. And these are changes in accounting to the 2008-9 year that essentially allow the governor's proposal to move forward and have no maintenance factor obligation moving into 9-10. So obviously, because there's constitutional issues, we don't think that you necessarily need to take action now, and you could wait. The third one is related to 2009-10 Proposition 98 spending reductions of $568 million. This consists of $340 million in savings from the K-3 class size reduction program. The program has some penalties associated with it. So if school districts choose to increase class sizes above 20, they are allowed to do that, but they do get less funding as a result of that. And the administration is estimating about $340 million in lower payments as a result of school districts increasing class sizes and therefore not taking the full amount of the program that they did in prior years. These are savings that would materialize whether or not the state took action right now. So again, we don't think there's an immediate need to recognize those savings. And similarly, the other reductions are $228 million, most of which are from K-12 revenue limit payments. This is per ADA funding that we provide to school districts. Attendance is a little bit lower than we expected, so there are some savings, and these would happen on the natural regardless of whether the legislature took action. The fourth bullet here is the QEIA prepayment, which we've discussed. It's again, it's only necessary if you choose to make these reductions in 910, then you would need to make this prepayment to maintain yourself above the maintenance of effort requirement. And then finally, in the last bullet here, we have two issues that we haven't talked about yet. These are reappropriations of unspent funds for 2009-10. 18.4 million is for the Charter School Facility Grant Program. And this funding is intended to provide additional funds for the program to convert it from a reimbursement program to a grant program. So right now, the program works as a reimbursement in that the amount of money that we're providing to charter schools in the 9-10 fiscal year is to pay for their facility costs from 2008-9. So they are essentially waiting a year to get reimbursed for the cost of their facilities. The administration is proposing to provide additional funding for the program so that in 9-10 they could pay off the 2008-9 costs and then also provide them the money that they need for the 2009-10 year. And then moving forward, they would be receiving funding for that specific year. This is something that there is intent language in the July budget that specified that the program should be turned into a grant program. So this would be consistent with the rules of the July budget. And then finally, the last piece is $20 million in categorical funding for new schools. These are schools that began operation in 8-9 or 9-10. And the reason why this proposal is on the table is because as part of the reductions that were made in 2008, 9, and 9-10, the state provided significant categorical flexibility for about 40 programs and told school districts that they could spend this money on essentially any educational activity. Now, to make it easier to allocate that money moving forward, what the state added in language in the statute said, you'll get whatever you got. Your allocations for 8-9 and moving forward are based on whatever you received in 7-8. Now, if you're a school that is new in 8-9, then you didn't get anything in 7-8, and there is no money for you sort of carved out in these programs. So this is $20 million that would carve out some money for these new schools. I believe most of them are charter schools, and there are some community day schools and others. And then so these two actions are for 9-10 activities. So we do think you would need to take action before the close of the 9-10 year. But again, we don't think that it's something that needs to be done immediately.
Can I ask a few questions on this one? So on the last two bullets that you spoke about, these are, we've been talking a lot about the maintenance factor in terms of what our agreement was last year. And in the governor's proposal, we, depending on a matter of interpretation, we deem it that we're not going to fulfill that statutory agreement that we made. But in this particular case, the governor is saying, yes, he is going to commit to the statutory agreement. In other words, there was a statutory agreement to move into a grant fund, and he's going to go ahead and fund charter school facilities. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And then help me to understand the $20 million for new schools, new schools sounds pretty general, but it really does mean new charter schools.
My understanding is that most of the funding is for charter schools, but there are other schools that are part of a school district, and I'm not clear about exactly sort of
because
why
new schools in a school district, if they're going to grow, they're on the natural, they're going to get growth because they're going to get that additional ADA. So I would imagine the only way that this seems to apply would be outside of the school district which would only be sort of a charter school, some standalone LEA.
Yeah, Rachel Ehlers with the analyst's office. Because these categorical programs are essentially locked in now, they're not really adjusted for growth if a district is growing. So if you're adding new schools because you're a growing district, we've essentially locked in the funding for these categorical programs at where they were in 8-9. So even if you're growing, you're not really going to be receiving more funds. So there are some districts who are opening new schools who've applied for some additional funds.
Okay.
Then most of them are charter schools, and then there are some community day. But the legislation also did say you can't just open a new school and redirect enrollment in order to generate more funding, right? If you're a district with a fixed number of kids and you just open a new school or shift,
Right.
you can't start generating more funds. So there really needs, this 20 million just represents the number of applications for new funding, but there hasn't really been enough time to dig into making sure that they really represent new schools, meaning new kids at new schools that should generate more funding and are eligible. So I think, as Edgar said, we'd recommend not taking action on this immediately because it needs a little more digging to make sure. Certainly there are going to be new charter schools and new schools who should get some of this funding because they didn't exist before, but we need to make sure it's the right amount.
So if schools were growing significantly but didn't need a new school, would this money apply to them as well?
No. It's
No.
just for new schools.
Oh, for new schools. So all of the categoricals that kind of get fixed in time, even though they actually physically have to build a new building before they would fall into getting some additional funding due to growth.
For these 40 programs, that's
these
true.
40
There are
programs.
still some programs that were left outside of the flex item, as we call it, that are still kind of caseload driven. Yeah, economic impact data is an example. If you've got more English learners, you're going to get more funding. But for these 40 programs that are in this flex item, you get the share of the pot that you got in 8-9, the statewide pot, share of the statewide pot. That's it.
Okay. And then on the class size reduction in terms of those figures, how did we come up with these dollar figures? Do we feel that they're accurate, or is it based on real data?
We don't have any real data on what school districts are doing this year yet. This is we came up with this estimate, so just based on discussions we've had with folks that are knowledgeable about what school districts are doing, and so of our understanding of the operation of the flexibility that was provided with class size reduction and how districts are handling the reductions in funding over the last couple of years. So we think it's a reasonable ballpark.
So the governor's asking us to make this reduction, and it could be less, it could be more, but you would just, if it's more, you'd just apply those savings to something else.
Right. We could certainly we'd certainly be willing to adjust this number when we get better data to, and that's what we typically do with these estimates.
But the special session, the clock's kind of ticking.
Right. So if the legislature adopted this reduction, we could come back in next year and amend it.
I see. Okay.
Because the savings will materialize, and because you don't have very good information on exactly how much it is, right? This is a sort of obvious candidate for just holding off a little bit until the underlying data is more solid.
Okay, and then last question is just on the first bullet, just around adjusting the 0809 98 spending by recognizing $83 million in K-12 revenue limit savings. So that sort of in isolation doesn't seem like such a big deal, but does it have more meaning than that? I mean, can you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Right. Well, the 2008-9, the July budget deal essentially certified or declared the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee in for 2008-9, and now what the governor is recommending is to adjust that amount, and this is based on the fact that there was lower than expected payments out to school districts because attendance was a little bit lower than we thought. So this is to reflect the expenditures, but by doing that, you are then amending the budget agreement, and that could open up a whole nother list of issues, such as whether we owe this maintenance factor in 2008-9. Is it owed and is it not? So it is part of this big, larger conversation about whether we what our maintenance factor obligation is. And it is also, 2008-9 is over. Expenditures were less than we thought. That's already happened. There is no need to sort of choose to act on this specifically without addressing the larger issue.
So there is a greater interrelationship here that is, I think, much more significant than what this bullet sort of in isolation represents. Okay. Any other questions from members? Let's see. Is this a good segue now to do public comment or on this? Okay. So, doesn't matter either way. Okay, all right. So, we'll go ahead then and hear child care and then have public comment and then perhaps have further discussion on the issues that were just presented as well as child care.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Rachel Ehlers with the Analyst's Office. I'll speak to just page 12 of the handout, the last page. And these are just the special session child care proposals that are before you. There are two. One is one is pretty technical, and one is a pretty big policy change. So the first here is just a proposed reduction in the Proposition 98 funding that goes for two of the state's subsidized child care programs, Stage 2 and Stage 3 of CalWORKs. And the administration has proposed to drop spending because of estimates that caseload was lower, so really just dropping to match the number of kids that are there. However, the Department of Education is raising issue that the Stage 2 adjustment is too deep and that actually we do need some of that spending. So what seemed like just a technical adjustment maybe is not quite so technical, and again, we would recommend just waiting until we see all of the data and find out, is this funding really needed? $9 million isn't going to make or break your budget situation, so we just recommend waiting on that. Okay. The second proposal here is a much bigger policy issue. It's lowering the reimbursement rates that we provide to child care providers. This is a proposal that would take effect in the budget year, but it's in special session in order to have the information in place for contracts that would start July 1st of 2010. So it's $77 million for Proposition 98. There's another $55 million associated with this for Stage 1 CalWORKs childcare that'll be heard in Budget Subcommittee 1. But just so you know, it's a larger issue than just the $77 million here. So currently, the way that we reimburse child care providers who are part of this system is we do a survey of what all the rates are charged by all private child care providers in the region and where is everyone, and we set our maximum reimbursement rate, the amount we're going to provide at the max, at the 85th percentile of what the rates are in that county. So where's the 85th in the line of 100, and that's the maximum we'll set. So 15% of the providers in the area charge higher. Subsidized clients would have to pay extra in order to go to them, but they can choose any one of these bottom 85% of all providers, and the state will reimburse up to that amount. So the proposal from the governor is to drop that reimbursement ceiling, the maximum amount we'd provide, to the 75th percentile, so that only 25% would be higher, would be kind of out of reach for those subsidized clients unless they wanted to pay the difference, but they could still access 75% of the providers. That's for subsidized clients who choose to go to licensed providers. For those who are using license-exempt providers, and these are typically relatives, we provide subsidies so that clients who need to work different kinds of hours can find providers who can meet their needs, who may not be a typical child care center that works 9 to 5. They're reimbursed at a slightly lower rate. They get 90% of what a licensed provider would charge, and the governor's proposing to drop them to 70% of that. So this is a lot of percentiles that we're flying at you, but I think the bottom line is for licensed providers, it would be from 15% above them to 25% above them, and for license exempt, even lower than that. I think the important thing to note here from our perspective is that all of this is based on market data from 2005. So a survey of what are the rates that everybody's charging in 2005. there is updated data. We've done a survey in 2007, and we just completed a survey in 2009. So I think from our perspective, it's a little misleading to claim that we're setting rates at the 75th percentile if it's the 75th percentile of 5 years ago. So our recommendation to you would be to use the most up-to-date data, be honest about what are the rates that are really being charged out there, and then we'll set our rates at whatever the state can afford based on that up-to-date data.
Thank you. Department of Finance?
Thank you. Sarah Swan, Department of Finance. So to the first issue, the estimate that we developed for the current year for Stage 2 and Stage 3 is based on an average of the caseload estimates provided by the Department of Education and the Department of Social Services. And we began, we started averaging the estimates with the May revision last year, and that's just because of the different methodologies that are used by both departments to estimate those costs. That was to avoid, a potential shortfall in the programs like we ran into a couple years ago. We would still maintain that this is a technical issue. Again, these are just estimates and based on projections from both the departments. And we can always revisit those estimates at a later point. I also want to point out that typically, and as the committee has seen in the past, typically we do see savings materialize, and that can, from both programs, both Stage 2 and Stage 3, and we can see those savings materialize up to 5 years after the appropriation. So I also just want to point that out as well.
Thank you.
Okay. And, pardon me, and then with respect to the RMR proposal,
the what proposal?
I'm sorry, the regional market rate reduction proposal. There are just a couple more things I would like to add. So, and as the LAO has pointed out, the reason that this is in a special session is that we do want to ensure that sufficient notification is provided for the rate reduction so that so the alternative payment agencies can get those rates in place, and then that way we would realize the full year of savings in 2010-11. I also want to point out, with respect to license-exempt providers, they don't have to adhere to licensing requirements. Adhere to requirements that apply to licensed programs such as staff-to-child ratios, facility requirements, et cetera. Licensing requirements typically would impose an initial and ongoing, higher initial and ongoing operating cost structure. And in addition, exempt providers typically serve one other family apart from their own. So the actual reimbursement rate that they charge is not influenced by market forces. So, in other words, private pay clients. So, absent that, then, there's really nothing to prevent a license-exempt provider from charging the maximum rate. So, currently, as the LAO pointed out, they're reimbursed at up to 90% of the 85th percentile, which is roughly 75th percentile of the market currently. Under the administration's proposal, by reimbursing at the 70% of the 75th percentile, that means that they would be about at the median point or middle point of the licensed market.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chesbrough.
Madam Chair, we know that child care is one of the lowest paid, but probably one of the more important roles in our society. Is there any data or any research on people leaving the market of providers when rates go down? In other words, are we going to affect the supply as a result of lowering rates?
We don't really have any information on what the impact would be.
It does seem
it's difficult to say.
At some point, somebody who's just barely making it decides, I can't do that anymore. I got to go to work at Walmart or something. Find some other way to make a living because I'm not getting enough money to pay my bills from from being a child care provider.
I do want to point out that the 75th percentile is consistent with federal guidance. So the federal law, there's no federal requirement for what the benchmark should be, but the suggested benchmark is the 75th percentile for providing equal access or choice among providers. The other thing is that we, at this point, we don't have current information on what percentage of providers are currently charging at the limit. So to the extent that, again, a family would have access to 75%, but it is possible that to the extent that they're currently charging at the limit, that a family would have to pay a co-payment. But again, we don't know to what extent that providers are charging at the limit. So we would still maintain that, given that this is consistent with the federal benchmark, that they would still have access to care.
Madam Chair, it wouldn't count as part of the public testimony that's not happening yet to call the Department of Education up to respond, would it, if they have anybody here who has any information on the question?
Sure, we can ask them.
Mr. Chesbrough, I have some information here, too, on the number of licensed facilities over the past 3 years has gone down. It's been going down steadily, not by a ton, but 2007 there were almost 55,000 licensed facilities, and in 2009 it's more like 53,500. But that also could reflect what's going on in the economy. If people aren't working, they're probably not using childcare as much and maybe staying home. And so there's all kinds of market forces that may be going on in that. But it has seemed that they have gone down.
They're not just able to afford it.
Right.
Does CDE have any other information, or is that the same information that...
I think it's a pretty compelling for the Department of Finance. I mean, what you said was that we have no information on impacts. And that's just kind of an overwhelming statement to me.
I think the other issue, Madam Chair, that I just wanted to raise is that federal guidance is to set it at the 75th percentile, thinking that provides equal access for subsidized clients can access at least 75% of the market. But if that's using data from 5 years ago, then it may not be actually 75% of today's market. I mean, looking at the survey results and the rates, it looks more like around the 50th percentile, so maybe they're only having access to half of the market.
I could also just point one clarification. While we are required under the federal law to conduct a survey every 2 years, we're not required to implement the survey. If we were to go with the 2007 survey, relative to the current limits, we wouldn't achieve any savings. And also, I just want to point out, too, that we have actually not seen the 2009 rates yet. The survey has not been released just as yet. So we haven't had an opportunity to do that.
When does the 2009 survey get released?
I know that the department has draft results now.
Right. We're working on. Hi, my name's Camille Maben. I'm with Director for Child Development. The 2009, we're in the final phases of finishing up with our contractor to put that report together, and we expect within the next couple of weeks that information will be. I'm going to look within the next couple of weeks for that information. Thank you. Okay. Will be completed, and so we would have that available.
Now, my understanding is that, at least it's been stated to me, that the reason for using the 205 is because the 207, we didn't like the assumptions that were made in the 2007, and so for the 2009 survey, are they and maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I have been told that there are certain assumptions that were made in the 2005 that were different in 2007, and the assumptions were preferred in the 2005 versus the 2007. So I guess, so if I'm wrong on that, maybe you should let me know.
There is just a little bit of history there. So I think there were assumptions actually in the originally in 2005. Was it 2005? Sharon's there. So this is actually insurance. Do you want to go ahead, Sharon?
Sure.
Sharon Taylor from the Department of Education. In the 2005 was the first year that we contracted for a different methodology to develop the ceilings. And the only thing that was different in 2000, well, it's actually not different in 2005. The methodology went to the market profiles and all the criteria that and components that they pulled in to develop market profiles. The original ceilings were done on a zip code basis, and that created, it was just kind of crazy to look at. And the superintendent determined at a point to roll the zip codes up to the county level, and then the ceilings were back at county level. So the methodology then from 2005 to 2007 maintained that. It's the same contractor. We went through a competitive process twice. Same contractor has the contract. They used the same market profiles in 2007 and in 2009. So it is now consistent over 3 contract processes. And the only difference in the 2005 was rolling it to the county level, because I think initially it was going, the preference was that it went to a zip code level, and that just had a crazy, it just looked very, very strange, because you have somebody providing care across the street, and yet your rates were really, really different. So it rolled up.
So the bottom line is the methodology is the same now in 2005, 2007, 2009. The only difference is that it's up to date.
Got it. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you. So there was an original question that you came up with the answer, and now
about
I've forgotten what it was.
I think about the RMR. Wasn't that the original question?
Number of licensed centers.
Number of licensed centers. And you have in front of you resource and referral folks have put together a chart for you that kind of looks at the change between 2006 and 2008, both in licensed centers and in, that's okay, family child care providers. So I think you can see by county the differences. I believe, and my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there is about a 20%, it's pretty normal to have a 20% kind of change, new ones coming in, some people going out of business, some people coming in. Just a churning of it is pretty standard.
Okay.
So.
Now, this doesn't necessarily, it hasn't been correlated with the reimbursement rates in terms of how those, this is just the actual history.
Right. The rates haven't gone down in recent years.
Yeah. So it doesn't really tell us what the effect would be of this action if we were to take it.
Correct. And I think obviously the advocates who have been talking with providers and things can give you anecdotally at least, what they're hearing. What we're hearing is that with the proposed changes and going to the 75th or lower, that could be for some the tipping point between staying and taking subsidized children or not. So when it comes to those types of things.
Right. So why you're here? So with the on the first item that we're looking at with regards to the caseload issue, and the Department of Finance talked about they're averaging and sort of estimating, and it seems like we should be. When we're talking about caseload, it seems like we should be pretty
using actuals.
And have precision as opposed to sort of estimating and averaging. But I just, do you have some comments on these numbers? And
I'm actually, this sounds funny, but I'm going to, Sharon is there because she does that fiscal end. So I'm going to.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So the department of last year for the 2009-10 budget, the section that made child care funding available for 5 years was repealed. So it is now a typical Budget Act item. First year to encumber, 2 additional years to spend. We have a process with a sweep drill for Prop 98 to identify savings as they materialize, but we typically do not look at the current year. Our numbers for Stage 2 It's almost a $500 million appropriation, and we have consistently for the last 6 months, our number is showing that we're going to pretty much fully spend. I think we're about $2 million savings. We have encumbered 100% of the money. To go in right now and reduce the appropriation would cause us to go out to providers and take money away. That just, it wreaks havoc in the field. It's an entitlement program, and you're going to end up turning back, and you go get $9 million, you're going to turn back and have to appropriate money. The process exists to get it. We shouldn't be, for such marginal dollars, doing this in the current year for this program, especially considering the history of how this program does the ups and downs depending on what happens in stage 1, depending on what happens to county allocations, depending on what's going on. It just makes no sense.
Right. So on the reimbursement rates, I mean, we talk in these, percentiles and so forth, but what does it really mean? What are the rates? What does it mean to the parent out there who is, dependent on this, that is either unemployed or just getting their feet on the ground in terms of employment? What kind of costs are we talking about for those people that they're going to have to, pay to ensure that their child or children have the care that they need?
Well,
what does it mean?
One of the things about it is what you think of, as Rachel has said, is by being at the 85th percentile, what you're doing is, say you have 100 providers. A parent comes in, they have access to 85 of them. So it tends to give parents more choice of quality care.
Uh-huh.
And so, and depending on their eligibility and need, we are going to say, and we're going to reimburse you, the state is going to reimburse you at this amount, and that you can then go and choose between, if there were 180, between 85. So I actually think what we've always said at the department is that it does give parents access to a wide variety of providers, of quality providers. And when you cut that down, that does it. The other thing I think you'll hear today is that for a lot of the people who are eligible for this kind of service, they themselves work in service areas. So some of the reasons that they might use a license-exempt provider is that their work hours, if you're in retail, if you're in food, are not necessarily always within a standard workday, and so license-exempt providers often, work in the evening, work in the day, or they're a family member, and they will take care of kids on different hours.
So when we're talking about this, maybe I'm confused now, but are you saying that there would be, based on these proposals, no change in the amount of reimbursements families would receive? Dollars. I mean, talking about their monthly payment for this and how much out of pocket they're going to have to pay now. You're saying that there's not going to be a reduction?
No. Where there would be the reduction is if a family has chosen a provider who's charging at the maximum already.
Uh-huh.
Right? Because what the proposal is to drop the maximum. So for those who've chosen somebody below the 85th percentile, their rates, the amount the state is reimbursing them isn't at the maximum, so they would have no change. For families who have chosen a provider who's charging at the highest level the state will currently reimburse, now the state's going to reimburse less. So either that provider would have to drop what they're charging, or they would keep their rates the same and the family would have to make up the difference.
I see.
Right?
Or go elsewhere.
Or go elsewhere.
Or the family would have to go elsewhere, right? If the family wants to stay with that provider, they have to make up the difference, or the provider has to drop the rate. So in terms of dollar terms, which is maybe what your question is, what does this mean? It differs by county because those ceilings differ across counties. But in LA County, it would be a drop of, for a full-time preschool rate at a child care center, it would be a difference of $84 a month, from $744 to $660. In Napa County, it would be from $730 to $686, so $44 a month. Alpine County, it'd be $112. It really differs by county.
So in LA County, just as an example, so what percentage I'm not sure what the right word is, but what percentage of the users are choosing services at the 85th percentile?
And that's what Department of Finance said we don't have the data on. Some of the advocates may be able to give you some anecdotal information.
The data's there, we just haven't collected it or been able to extrapolate it, or
We don't have any current data on the percentage of providers who are currently charging at the limit. There was a study
well,
that
what was last year's?
we
The year before?
there was a study that was done about 10 years ago, and I would have to look to my colleagues from the Department of Social Services. But again, that would be old information. There was, you may recall, we put some funding in the budget last year for a characteristic study that the Department of Education was to work in consultation with Department of Social Services, and perhaps the Department of Ed could tell us what the status of that contract is to get that kind of information.
We're in the process. I think the amount was 250,000. We, truthfully, to do a characteristic study, we've had a little bit of trouble finding someone for that amount, but we are in the process of contracting with UC Davis to do that characteristic.
So a characteristic study would tell us, answer the question, what is the percentage of people at a particular percentile, percentage of users at a particular percentile, but then it would break down the characteristics of that population as well to say...
Right. Yeah, that's what we're looking at. What does this population look like? You know, collect more information than currently we have available to us.
The point of my previous question still stands, though, because even though it's maybe harder to draw a line and say this is the exact effect, the fact of the matter is that you're withdrawing money from the market and reducing the amount of money that's available to reimburse providers. And that may, that trying to pin down how that affects one particular provider or one particular family is difficult because it's going to kind of shake down through the marketplace. But the fact of the matter is, my original point is still there, which is that there's less money, and that's undoubtedly going to eventually at some point lead to less providers and less availability.
Agreed.
And again, I think it's important to note that if we're saying how many are charging at the ceiling, and we're envisioning the ceiling at this 85th percentile, again, that's 85% of the market in 2005. Mm-hmm. So looking at our initial look at the 2009 data, it's closer to, somewhere around 60%. So how many are charging at the 60% ceiling is probably even more than we're at really 85%. So,
and the opening comments too, it was said that that a portion of this proposed funding cut was coming from another fund and not Prop 98.
That's right. It's 50. The administration's estimate is 55 million general fund, 77 million Prop 98.
Okay, so this is not. Okay, so it's general fund dollars, the other 55?
Right, okay. Because the child care world has a piece of it that's managed by Department of Social Services, and they are outside of the Prop 98, the stage one of CalWORKs.
And the split between 77 from Prop 98 and 55 from general fund, is there any rationale behind that?
There actually is.
Which is?
It's just the 55 is how much savings they think they would get for just the providers who provide stage one of CalWORKs childcare. Stage one is fully funded on the general fund side. Stage 2 and 3 are fully on the 98 side. There's a kind of dividing wall between them because one is run by DSS and the others are run by CDE.
Okay. It has nothing to do with future Prop 98 funding.
I can bring maintenance factor into the conversation if you want me to.
I didn't quite catch that. How much is spent out of Prop 98 on child care?
Total, it's about $1.7 billion, but what we're talking about here is the amount of savings that would come from this proposal for just stage 2 and 3 would be $77 million.
Great. Any other questions? Welcome, Mr. Swanson. Thank you.
Good to see you in the seat.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've just gone through a pretty extensive conversation around Prop 98 and now child care, and I think now we will have public comment. So I think maybe if you stay, because there might be questions after we hear the public comment, that would be helpful, and people can line up on both sides of the horseshoe here.
Go ahead.
Carol Bingham from the department. I just wanted to comment about Prop 98, and then we'll have Camille will make some comments about the child care. Just a couple quick notes about the current year issues. We'll have more comments later about budget year, later hearings. We have a lot of questions about the Prop 98 calculations that haven't been answered. We'll continue to work with Finance and the Analyst's Office to try to figure out exactly where some of the numbers that have been cited are coming from, because we can't figure it out.
What do you mean? Give me an example.
Well, we can't track the savings number. There's a savings of $2.4 billion, and we can't figure out where that comes from. We've also the special session budget bill has not been released, or the special session trailer bill has not been released, and we really don't know the full extent of the proposals, nor exactly how they would be implemented. So we hope that we could see that eventually. We don't feel confident in the projected program savings. We've already discussed child care. K-3 class size reduction is particularly at risk. There's really no basis for the proposed reduction of $340 million, and the legislature takes a risk that this funding level, if they take that $340 million, that will actually have to take back dollars from districts that are implementing the program.
What do you mean that there's no foundation for the $340 million?
We haven't been able to get any documentation as to exactly how that number was derived.
So when the Department of Finance says it's an estimate, do you believe it's an estimate, or, I mean, in the ballpark?
Well, it's clearly an estimate because there's no data.
I understand that it's clearly an estimate. Everybody agrees on that. But in terms of an estimate, do you think they're in the ballpark, or do you think they're so far off it's ridiculous?
We don't have a clue. We don't have any data on this program.
Thank you.
Estelle Lemieux with the California Teachers Association. I'd like to address the special session that the governor proposed issues. The first one regarding the certification of Proposition 98 and the agreement that was agreed upon with the Ed Coalition. When we had our discussions and when we came to a final decision with everybody involved, including the Department of Finance, it was agreed upon that we would go with certifying Proposition 98 at the $49.1 billion level. We never agreed on uncertifying Proposition 98. And I'm sorry, I'm representing the Ed Coalition as well today, not only CTA. For us to undo the certification in the 08-09 budget would make Proposition 98 totally meaningless, period. And so to go back and undo that is a very serious matter, and we're looking at that very, very seriously. Many of our state leaders in the coalition are angered and upset that we stepped up to the plate. We agreed in February to cuts. We came back in July. We were asked to step up to the plate again to the tune of $5.2 billion. We did what we thought was the right thing. We did our fair share and beyond that, because we have taken the brunt of the cuts in the last couple years to the tune of 60%. And frankly, when this was proposed by the governor under the guise of protecting public funding for education, public education funding, it's just ludicrous. So we hope that this committee seriously considers this as going back on an agreement and opposes this particular budget proposal on uncertifying, if you will, Proposition 98 for the 08-09 year. We also have very serious concerns about the gas tax swap for the excise fee, which we are being told that there's some serious consideration about that budget proposal this week, perhaps a vote on it on the Senate side by Friday. Again, this is another way of circumventing and lowering Proposition 98 by not allowing the fee to go to general fund revenues. And we also take this very seriously. There is not only an impact on mass transit funding, but there's a huge impact to the tune of approximately $1 billion for Proposition 98 when you take a tax and you circumvent the general fund revenues. We take this very seriously and we oppose it adamantly. We call it redefining the Prop 98 guarantee. Again, I thought the LAO did a good job with the MOE, explaining the MOE level, doing these gimmicks, these manipulations, if you will, of circumventing, again, doing the fast-forwarding payment of QEIA and the gas tax swap, which has, lowers the Prop 98 guarantee. With the MOE is something that we have informed. We, as the education community here, have informed the Secretary of Education at the federal level, Mr. Duncan, we do not want to jeopardize, understand clearly, the ARA funds, the federal stimulus dollars. That's not our intent. But at the same time, we need to let the government know some of the manipulations that are being created here to lower, if you will, funding for education. And we disagree with that. There may be some other ways of, without having to apply for a waiver. So we are concerned very gravely about the what they're doing in terms of trying to meet the MOE requirement. We don't like the cuts. We oppose that as well. And but mostly the manipulations surrounding Proposition 98 we are taking very seriously. We never agreed to go back and undo the certification of any, and it's never occurred, Proposition 98. And on the maintenance factor issue, we believe that statute was indeed meeting the constitutional requirements of Proposition 98. And we have 3 organizations within our own coalition, SCIU, CFT, and CSBA, who had a suit on this last year regarding the maintenance factor. And it's still, it's not gone away. So just to let the members know here, we are very concerned, and we hope that you do the right thing by opposing these egregious budget proposals. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Danita Stromgren, and I'm with the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network. First, I'd like to concur with the LAO recommendation on holding off on making any changes to the Stage 3 allocation until there is more data on the use, and my colleagues will talk about that a little bit more. More specifically, I would like to expand on our concerns with regards to the access to child care in the event that the regional market rate were to be reduced. First, the purpose of the regional market rate is really to provide equal access to subsidized low-income families equal to that of the private pay families. We're concerned, you saw the information on some of the reductions already in the availability of child care. It is impacting some counties certainly more than others. In some counties, up to 28% of the family child care providers have seen a loss in terms of the capacity in certain counties. That was 2008 data from the California Child Care portfolio. We have heard from our members anecdotally, as you probably are aware, that a lot of family child care providers have discontinued doing care as a result of foreclosures, either as a result of their own loss in income or if they were renters, the landlord's loss without any knowledge or loss of payment of rent on their part. So we're seeing that there's an even greater decrease in the capacity of providers in certain areas. If the regional market rate were to be reduced, we're feeling that the hardest to locate childcare, that of infant care and non-traditional hour care, will be most likely the highest cost in that upper area that Rachel talked about. And we're concerned that that will really further reduce the accessibility of care for those families. Or, as Rachel mentioned, there will be a copayment. Now, this is it's a little confusing at times because parents might be paying a copayment, which is the amount that's over the regional market rate ceiling reimbursement. But some of these families might also be paying a family fee based on the income and the number of members in their family. So they could get hit twice, potentially. And these are families who are already, as we know, struggling. So we would urge you to really seriously consider the access issue because we're very concerned with how this is going to impact families.
Is the family fee an issue that's legislated, or is that a fee that providers voluntarily charge?
No, the family fee is charged based on the family's income and the number of members in that family. That's either paid directly to the subsidized program as their sort of contribution overall to their subsidy, and it is legislated.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Snaringer, and I'm with the Child Care Resource Center in Los Angeles, which is the Child Care Resource and Referral Program and Alternative Payment Agency that represents a good portion of your district, Ms. Brownlee. I wanted to give you some local examples and also talk a bit about some of the data we're trying to collect. As far as the reduction to stage 2 and 3 in current year, we concur with the LAO that we really need to take a look at the actual enrollment. In Los Angeles County, because of the changes in stage 1 funding for child care, there have been many families who have been transferred into stage 2. And at the Child Care Resource Center, our program is currently over-enrolled to the tune of about $2 million. So I don't know that that savings is actually there, and I think before any action is taken, we really do need to take a look at current enrollment and let the department do due diligence to get there. Looking at the rate reduction, we are trying to get a grasp of how many providers are being paid at that cap level, and just taking a quick look at Child Care Resource Center, there's 216 centers and 700 family child care homes currently being paid at that cap. So we're trying to get what the percentage is of the whole and working with our colleagues around the state so we could give you a better picture of that. We do know that that has steadily increased as we've held the rate steady. So when it was put into place in 2005, it was fairly accurate, but as the years pass, it becomes more and more antiquated, and providers their rates are now meeting that capacity. Lastly, I wanted to speak a bit about the proposal around reducing rate for exempt care providers. We know that more than half of families, particularly in the CalWORKS program, access license exempt care, and it's because they work in non-traditional jobs. They work in retail, restaurant, call center, the kinds of things where they have rotating schedules and their schedules aren't steady from week to week, and licensed care typically doesn't meet these needs. The proposal that was outlined in your agenda today looked at for a full-time care for a preschool-aged child going from $615 a month to $445. That's $100 a week, and it really is for work for more than 30 hours to be in a full-time category. So it's really not very much money to be caring for a child, and I really would hope that you would consider that and think about opposing these proposals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Monica Nestrosa with the San Diego Unified School District. I'd like to touch on 3 points. The first is the Proposition 98 recertification issue, which CTA and the Ed Coalition mentioned their opposition of. My school district also has grave concerns. In the first instance, we think it's legally questionable. In the second instance, we also think it goes against the legislative intent, which was very specifically outlined in the implementing statutes. The legislature clarified in the intent language preceding the certification in statute in AB 3 of the 4th Extraordinary Session that regardless of what data may come up in the future, that the Proposition 98 level would not be recalibrated. It's a commitment made by the legislature, and we hope that it's one you will uphold. The second issue that I wanted to address has to do with the federal maintenance of effort, and it's one that this committee has explored a bit. We think there is risk about whether or not the state can actually go forward and make cuts that would jeopardize federal funding. And the risks come in a couple of different ways. The first has to do with the QEIA issue, which is outlined in page 7 of the LAO report. And as Assemblymember Brownlee asked, what does this mean when we forward fund, and does it meet the intent? An equivalent situation that we can draw to sort of illustrate the problem with this forward funding accounting manipulation is what would happen if the state were to give, say, $250 million in special education funding for 10-11, which has to be given for services in 10-11 to school districts a year early, and give it to us on June 30th, so before the 2009-10 close of the fiscal year. Obviously, that money would be, in fact, for services for 10-11, even if we receive it 12 hours prior to the close of our books in 9-10. We think that the situation with the QEIA forward funding is very similar. It's something where it doesn't make sense that that money would actually count as support for current year when, in fact, it's being given at a time when it's clear that the funding will be for the next year, and also where there are programmatic obligations that would require us to use it for the next year. At best, it is a loan, but certainly it doesn't count as current year support. And we think that given federal statute and given the implementing guidance, the federal government has made clear that they don't want the maintenance of effort circumvented. We think there is a grave risk. We certainly wouldn't want the state to put itself in a position where after it's adopted certain cuts, it has to go back and repay them to schools. As those of you who have worked in local agencies or have served on school boards know, one of the worst things that can happen to school boards is to have uncertainty, where you suddenly think you have more money, then you have less, then you have more, and you're not able to make the best decisions for students in the midst of that uncertainty. The second issue with the maintenance of effort has to do with revenues versus expenditures. And as the LAO outlined, federal statute is incredibly clear. It talks about total available state revenues, and that's a quote. What has happened is that in administrative guidance, the federal government subsequently said, well, expenditures, appropriations is what they call it, can serve as a suitable proxy for states that want to use that level of funding. Let's go ahead and make it easier for states. There may be a marginal difference, but for the most part, people spend what they have. And so they're pretty good proxies for each other. In the case of California, however, what has happened is that we've been deficit spending. And we've been deficit spending not for education. Education has taken every single cut that the legislature has implemented for it. But we've deficit spended in other areas. And what that's meant is that actually even as revenues go up, our expenditures are going to have to go down. As a result, using expenditures, we believe, is not a real accurate way of portraying the level of state support, and we think that there is the potential for the federal government to agree with that, and that in fact California does not meet the eligibility requirements for a waiver. We don't think that that's certain yet, and again, we think that there's risk. For those reasons, we think it's important for the state legislature to proceed with caution, to not make cuts that it may in the end have to restore and create uncertainty at the district level in the meantime. On the last issue, which is class size reduction savings, clearly there's no number that's yet known for what kinds of savings may exist and be available to the state to sweep up. But from San Diego's perspective, we want to make clear that class size reduction cuts aren't just sweeps. They're real cuts to schools. We at San Diego had to increase our class sizes for our youngest students in grades kindergarten through third grade to 24-1. And in doing so, we did save some money, but in fact, we had to return to the state $13.5 million. If we hadn't had to give those penalties back, we could have stayed at 20-1. We could have provided our students with much more individualized instruction, and parents would have felt much more satisfied with the quality of education being given. So we want to make sure that these aren't just seen as savings that materialized, because there wasn't use or there wasn't demand for the program. In fact, it's because our penalty system is such that we have to go higher to get savings, and as a result, the state benefits. But it's really a benefit that's coming at the expense of the education of our youngest students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Jennifer Fisher with the California Alternative Payment Program Association. I'd like to echo some of the comments made by my colleagues and also make a few points. We totally agree with the Department of Education and LAO that the projections for stage 2 and 3 are definitely trending up. And as CDE said, it would wreak havoc. It would wreak havoc for them to come back out to our providers and ask for the money back. onto the RMR issue, first I want to state for the record, really, this should not be a special session issue. This is a huge policy issue that will have major impacts on families, major fiscal impacts for providers, and would really, really shake up an already fragile child care system. One of the questions was asked about what percentage of the providers are already being reimbursed at the cap. And we started to survey our alternative payment programs in different counties, and we found that in Riverside, San Diego, San Francisco, Ventura, Santa Clara, and many others, approximately 80% or more of the providers were already at the cap because these, like Aleo has said, these are 5-year-old rates. So we would be very, very nervous if the rates were reimbursed down. The family impact is huge, as Ms. Stromgren and Ms. Nerger stated. In your agenda, you have the example of the family in LA County and using a licensed exempt provider, and the difference is $170. This family might be paying a family fee, as Ms. Stromgren stated out, but $170 for one child. They might have more than one child. So that family is going to have to go find another provider that might be able to care for their child. And then finally, the governor keeps saying that he's all about jobs, jobs, jobs. But I want to remind the committee, and I'm sure you already know this, that in order for people to get a job, 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 or keep a job, 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 which is just as important in this economy, they have to have child care for their children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And childcare is a job, job, job.
I was just going to, that thought was in my head as well.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dion Aroner, and I'm here on behalf of the Child Care Providers United Union, which is a joint organizing effort of SEIU and AFSCME. And I have with me this morning providers of child care here in California who have come from around the state to testify on behalf of looking at this issue in regards to whether or not you're going to reduce child care rates, meaning child care dollars that go into their homes on a daily basis. I'm going to save my remarks until after they've spoken, all right, because I really want you to hear from them. I have this thing about real people testifying, all right?
Thank you.
So I have with me Socorro Avitia, who is also going to act as a translator because we have 2 Spanish-speaking providers, Tonia McMillan, Janine Rockwell, Ruth Erazo, and Maria Sanchez, all right? And they'll identify themselves as they come up.
I just want for the record to say that we're all real people. We just have different roles and responsibilities.
I'm sorry, you're absolutely right.
You.
I used to call them the regulars. They're the regulars and they're real
Got
people.
Thank you.
I wanted to say I remember when Ms. Aroner chaired a committee in this House, and I was always very impressed when I was there. She'd say, I want to call on the people who aren't paid to be here first. And then, secondly, anyone here who's paid can wait until after the people who aren't paid to be here. I like that.
Thank you.
I'm Janine Rockwell, and I have been a child care provider in Antioch, California for over 35 years. And I have a real history. I'm very active in many different aspects, including working with UC Davis Extension to train child care providers. I would like to first let you know that some of the things that have been set up here are incorrect. One of the things that was mentioned is that child care is from 9 to 5. No, people work from 9 to 5. And if you are a child care provider in Antioch, a lot of your parents work in San Francisco. That's at least a 2-hour commute on both ends. So child care providers in my area work 6 to 6 if they're lucky, and usually later and earlier than that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Our workday is extremely long. Another clarification that I would like to make is that it's kind of been hemmed and hawed at about supply. Well, let me tell you, I personally know at least a dozen providers in my community who are no longer able to work in the field because it doesn't pay enough to survive. Parking attendants are paid more than child care providers. The public in California chooses to pay someone to watch their car more than they pay to have their children watched. That's really sad. Okay, something else. I'd like you personally to think about what you were paid in 2005. Is that the check you would like to receive today? I would guess not. Okay. They're talking about paying us 85%. Or actually, they're asking us to be paid 75% of our 2005 paycheck. Is this fair? I think not. Okay. The quality of care is important. To give access to those who need care desperately, we need to make sure that our providers are decently paid. So the first thing I would say is we can't go with 2005 RMR, because that's just ridiculous. And I can tell you again, and I myself have done it, when a copay is required, parents can't afford it. There's no way. Do you know who subsidizes that? Child care providers. We go, I know you're on subsidy. I know you don't have any money. I know that your husband just left you. I know that you have all these things going on in your family. I'll take it. And so many, many times, not only myself, but I know other providers who, as well, who subsidize copays. And parents really can't afford that extra money. They really, really can't. And we feel sorry for the kids. They're the ones who suffer. So, the governor is asking us once more to tighten our belts. I say we just need to say no. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's okay, don't worry. You're right. Good morning, everybody. I was here last year, and I'm here again, and I'm gonna be here next year too if I need it, and I'm gonna be here until we get something fair for our kids and for the providers too, for our community, and for.
Will you just state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so excited. I'm sorry. My name is Socorro Avitia. I'm a child care provider from Los Angeles, and I'm working for already 7 years. I'm a foster mom too, and I'm really proud to be a foster mom because that's one of the kids they need all the service too. And you know what? I hear about the impact. And like a child care provider, I know the impact they're going to be if you cut all this money. Because you don't cut already. And now I see the parents' face when they told me, oh, do you hear about what is going to be happening in a few months or next year? I say, yeah. And what is going to be happening with us? What is going to be happening with my kids? I say, look, yes, we're going to do whatever we have to do, but we're not going to leave your kids alone. Your kids, they're going to have a child care provider no matter what. Because you know what? These kids is going to be our future. Everybody talks about the change, about the economic situation, about everything. These kids, they have 5 years old. In 10 years, they're gonna be the people. They're gonna make decisions. They're gonna vote in. They're gonna want to do something. But we're not gonna cut everything to them. We need to live at least good education, good place, safe place. Something basic. They don't ask for something fancy, like a new car, like a new childcare. No. They want to play. Sometimes they have to play with the toys we find in the yard sale. Why? Because we don't have enough money to buy new toys. And this is something really bad for the kids. And, the parents, they need to work. Especially, for example, the nurse. They're working in the night. Who's going to take care of these kids? And we're going to, like she said, we're going to get the pay like if we're going to take care, what, a dog? I mean, our kids deserve the best, the best. That's why, when I hear all this one, maybe I don't know too much about the numbers, but I know too much the faces of my parents and my kids. And I don't want to see their faces like that. The only thing I can do is to tell my parents, don't worry, your kids, they are okay. They're going to get food. They're going to get nice house and food and everything. And the other one, let's see what is going to be happen later. But, you know, it's really hard. I'm sure everybody have sons, grandsons, you know, family. And more than one people, they need a child care. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Are you going to provide translation?
Okay.
Okay. As best you can.
All right. I'm going to try my best, okay? She speaks Spanish, but my English is not so good, but you know.
Oh, your English is perfect.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Buenos días a todos. Buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es María Sánchez. Soy proveedora de cuidado infantil por 11 años. Tengo mi licencia para 14. Tengo 6 hijos míos y aparte cuido 9 niños.
Okay. Her name is Maria Sanchez. She's a child care provider for 9 years, and she have 6 kids their own, and she's take care 12.
Yes.
12 kids.
Hay en mí una grande preocupación.
She's worried a lot.
Porque es un impacto muy grande.
It's a very big impact.
Lo que ha ocasionado la economía.
The economic situation.
A padres de niños que yo cuido.
A parents for my children, whatever is in my care.
Han perdido sus casas.
They lose the houses.
Algunos sus trabajos.
Some parents, the jobs, they lose to the job.
Ahora estos recortes que el gobernador quiere hacer.
The cuts the governor proposed.
Va a ser aún impacto más fuerte para las familias.
They're going to be something really, really bad for families.
Para nosotros como proveedoras.
And for us like a provider.
Yo cuidaba 14 niños.
I was taking care of 14 kids.
Ahora solamente tengo 9.
Now I have only 9.
5 niños se han ido de mi cuidado porque sus padres perdieron sus trabajos.
5 kids, they left from my house because the parents, they lose the job.
Estos recortes no solamente los va a afectar a los padres, sino también a nosotros como proveedoras.
This cut is going to affect everybody, not only the parents, but us like a providers too.
Porque el cuidado que nosotros damos es un cuidado de calidad.
Because the take care we give to the kids is a quality.
Abrimos desde las 5 de la mañana.
We open 5 o'clock.
Y en ocasiones cerramos hasta las 12:30 m de la noche.
And sometimes we have to work until 11 or 12 p.m. In the night.
Y mi opinión es la economía bajó mucho.
My opinion is the economic is too down.
Pero los precios no han bajado.
But the prices
no han bajado.
And is down too.
La gasolina es un precio muy alto.
The gas is too high.
Las rentas son precios muy altos.
The rent too is too
Los
high.
pagos de las casas muy altos.
The payment of the mortgage.
Pero no, el gobernador no ha pensado que nuestros niños.
The government doesn't think in our kids.
Es el futuro de este país.
That's the future of this country.
Que si ellos se quedan sin un cuidado de calidad.
If they don't have child care, with the quality.
Ellos van a crecer en gangas.
They're going to grow up in the gangs or on the streets.
Porque igual las escuelas están cortando muchos programas.
Because in the schools too, they don't have the programs like before.
Programas que les ayudaban a los niños a estimularse para seguir adelante.
The programs in the school, they're going to help to the kids to stay in the school, to stay safe.
Solamente hay una confianza en mí.
Only I have something, how do you say confianza? Confidence, yeah, I'm sorry.
Que hay un Dios muy grande.
The God is big.
Y Él va a traer un buen gobernador.
And they're going to bring to us a good governor.
Que vea por su grande país.
This governor, they're going to look for the country, for the state.
Y que va a haber muchos niños que un día van a ser jóvenes y van a ser grandes y van a ser grande este país. Gracias.
We're going to have the kids and they're going to be a big one and they're going to be a good one in this country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where does she provide care?
María, ¿dónde está proveyendo su cuidado de niño?
En Salinas, California.
In what county is that? It's
Monterrey.
Monterey County. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me tell you something. Today, she closed the daycare to come over here. Wow. She had to close the daycare. For her, very struggle because she had 9 kids. She closed the daycare to come over here to fight for the children.
Well, tell her thank you very much for being here and for her courage in testifying, and the committee is really hearing what she has to say. So thank you very much.
Buenos días, yo me llamo Ruderazo, también vengo del condado de Monterrey, la ciudad de Salinas. Soy proveedora de cuidado de niños con la licencia de 14.
Me llamo Ruth y vengo del condado de Salinas. ¿En inglés?
Erazo.
Ruth Erazo.
It's a little bit hard.
Ruth Erazo.
Erazo. Ruth Erazo. And she's coming from Salinas to Monterey County, and she have a license for 14 kids.
Vengo trabajando como proveedora por 7 años. Me siento muy gustosa. He estado haciendo un trabajo muy agradable.
She's working for 7 years already, and she's really happy to do this job.
Porque siento que esos niños que están en mi casa son un tesoro para sus padres y para mí también.
Because she feeling the kids that she have at her house is a treasure, yeah, and she's happy.
Y he tratado siempre de estar en una educación continua para poder así dar un cuidado de calidad para que los niños estén preparados, porque yo siento que tengo una grande responsabilidad con esos niños, porque esos niños están en mi casa todo el día y sus padres están trabajando y los miran quizá 1 hora y ellos ya se van a dormir.
She tried to get education through this year to give quality, because she knows the parents, they are working all day, and these kids, they have to stay all day with her, and she wants to give the best education to these kids.
Y por eso yo siento lo que sus papás están sintiendo ahora al saber que se van a quedar sin el cuidado de niños. Tengo madres que son con 4 niños, 3 niños.
She say she feeling too the same way the parents feeling when they know they're gonna stay without childcare and they don't know what is gonna be happening.
Y al momento yo tengo 13 niños en mi casa al cuidado infantil.
I have 13 kids right now.
Y siento que al haber estos pequeños recortes, que no son pequeños, porque a la larga y a la corta van a ser muy grandes y de muchos problemas que van a acarrear al país.
These small cuts now, she say, she knows in the future is going to be a huge problem.
Y al decir yo que va a traer grandes problemas, estoy mirando el futuro.
And when I'm talking about the problem, I'm looking in the future.
Este futuro va a traer unas consecuencias muy graves tanto para los niños como para sus padres y para mí, que soy proveedora de cuidado infantil, y no solo para mí, sino para todas mis compañeras que hacemos este cuidado infantil, porque sus papás se van a quedar sin trabajo, los niños sin cuidado y nosotros las proveedoras también sin trabajo.
She look a big problem because, the parents, they're going to stay without job. Providers, they're going to stay without job. The kids, they don't have childcare. So she's looking in the future too much problems.
Y yo hago un llamado de corazón que por favor todas las personas, no solo el gobernador, sino quienes trabajan también con él, pues traten de ver la manera de no hacer estos recortes, sino de buscar otros.
She's calling to you guys from her heart. Try looking, everything slow. I mean, try to do your best because, she knows you're doing your job, but you have to try to do your best.
Que pensemos que el grave problema no es a unas solas personas, sino son a muchas, y en especial a los niños que son el futuro de la patria.
she said thinking, and this is not only the problem for some people, it's for everybody, especially the kids, and they are the future of the country.
Gracias por su
Thank
atención.
you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tanya McMillan, and I have been a family child care provider for the past 15 years. I'm from Bellflower, California, and I am a Child Care Providers United member also. As we already know, we have been functioning on a 2005 reimbursement rate ceiling. I am recently divorced and a single parent. I'm trying to maintain my business at the level, at the standard that I decided I was going to set it when I started 15 years ago. I'm already taking a reimbursement reduction from my resource and referral agency. So what was already difficult for me has become even more strained for me. My children leave my program as young citizens in society. They call me Auntie Tanya. Their parents call me Auntie Tanya. We're not related, but this job is about relationships. I have a youngster right now whose mother I kept in my child care, and now her son comes to me. It's about relationships. It's about longevity. I'm working on a 2005 reimbursement rate, and if it goes any lower, my quality of care is definitely going to decrease. I teach my children social skills, math skills, science skills. When they leave from me, they are more than ready for kindergarten, overly ready for kindergarten. They know how to follow the rules. They know how to say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. They know how to wait for their turn. They know all the basic fundamentals that a preschooler would have to know. All of my kids, their kindergarten teachers are so pleased to have them because they come prepared. I have to take the money that I have now, and it is so hard for me to find manipulatives for my kids and paints and crayons and science things and outdoor playground equipment because a lot of my kids live in apartments. They can't go outside, but when they come to my house, they get to go outside. They get to run. They get to stretch their legs. They learn how to bounce a ball. They learn how to catch. The co-payment situation, like my fellow child care provider, I don't even ask for it. I know my parents. I know their financial situation. I know they can't afford it. I can't afford it, but I do it because I have to. I love the kids that come to my child care. I love their parents, even though they can be difficult sometimes, but because they want more, and I give more. I have sat down and had to make a decision. Do I want to continue to accept subsidized children? And I haven't completely decided yet, but I know that if the regional market rate is decreased, I am more than likely going to cease because I can't afford it, and it hurts. It absolutely hurts. So everybody's pretty much touched on everything else. So I am so against this, and if it does happen, it is just so wrong. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to testify.
So, in closing, there were some questions asked regarding what are we seeing regarding our child care providers going out of business. And while you heard that there are no numbers, in other words, the state doesn't have a database to be able to tell you that, I can tell you because we have people, our organizers are continually visiting people. I call them on the doorstep, right? They're going to visit family child care providers, and what do they find, what they're finding. And we're trying to do a survey, right? But I can't tell you it's scientific because it's not. But we're trying to do a survey based on the addresses that we've been given by the State Department of Social Services, which are not particularly up to date. And we're finding a lot of foreclosure notices, right? In other words, there's a sign in front saying this house has been foreclosed on. We knock on the doors, there's nobody there. And so the fact that somebody has a license does not mean that child care is being provided. It just means that there's an active license that nobody has deactivated, but there might be no care provided. It might be that the Department of Social Services needs to be asked at some point to go and find out who is active and who's not active on their list, all right? In regards to the license exempt issue, this idea of reducing the rates to license exempt, that is where you get your flexibility. the value of being, and our infant care, where a lot of the infant care is taken care of, right? At this point, families choose family members, right? They do that very often temporarily, as you know. That's why you heard this issue about where are people, are they in stage 1, 2, or 3? Each county makes that determination differently, by the way. That is, there's not a statewide standard that says somebody moves from 1, 2 to 3, and so getting numbers on that, as you heard, is not easy, and that's one of the issues. But license exempt care gives families some flexibility, particularly when they are at the beginning of their training or they're in a new job or whatever. They haven't stabilized, their child care hasn't stabilized. It also gives them hours that are not normal and very often are not available in the licensed community at this point, just because of cost. The cost factors are so dramatic. And so anything you do, if you reduce those costs so significantly, you are cutting off access to those CalWORKs families. You've already done that. You have already made decisions in regards to CalWORKs, which you did a few months ago, to diminish the number of people who are going to be going through the actual CalWORKs part of the program, as opposed to the eligibility side, the income maintenance, right? That's already going to have a dramatic effect on the child care community itself. Those reductions, right, are going to reduce the number of child care providers in the community on the natural. The issue here is what are you going to do when the economy returns and this industry has been so decimated and they will not return? All right, we have a hard enough time now, just given the history of the child care movement in this state and in this country, in introducing and enticing people to come into the child care field because they have so many other options. And in the subsidized world, given the fact that you aren't paying very much, as you heard, providers are beginning to think about whether or not they drop their subsidized children or not. They don't want to, but you are giving them no reason, right, or way for them to be able to financially afford to keep those subsidized children. What are you going to do? More importantly, when you heard the rate description on the child care centers, right? When a child care center closes, it could be 200 or 300 children that are all of a sudden out of child care because you haven't given them a sufficient rate or been able to do that. It's one, and you've heard testimony here from family child care providers when 14 children are affected. When a child care center takes the cut that's being proposed on this table, you are talking about threatening huge centers that are the institutional basis of our child care system. We can't afford to have that happen. Where are those children going to go? Lastly, in regards to the RMR survey, the survey, as you've heard, is required by the federal government. We do not have to follow it necessarily, except there's a state statute that says we shall do it and that we shall adopt rates based on those on that RMR survey. Last year, this legislature and governor decided to continue to use the 2005 survey at the 85th percentile. We in the child care community understood, given the financial situation last year, that would be how it would be handled. We feel very strongly about maintaining the 85th percentile. That is the access. That is the way for families to get access. Right? I appreciate the LAO's thing about saying we need to present a reality, right? A view of the real world, actually what we're paying. That might be true for this year. But if you lower that percentile to 75 or something lower, it will take us years and years and years to recoup that and to get back to where we can give more access to more families in a more realistic way, and particularly to poor families. When you reduce that rate, you are affecting poor families. Because child care is provided very often, subsidized child care is provided in communities that don't have the economic viability of a community right next door to them. So you have just literally sliced off access to those very same families you're trying to serve by reducing that. So I think it's incredibly important for you to look at that. I appreciate the argument, but I think given what we know about the institution we're all talking about and about what we're looking at in the out years at some point, right, to reduce that could be very threatening to the future of child care, particularly subsidized child care here in California.
Thank you very much. I have been trying to allow as much public testimony as possible and give latitude to that because this is our only hearing, is my understanding, for this budget hearing for the special session. But we do have caucus at noon, and we do have another item here as well. So I just want to put that out there and hope that everybody understands that I do have a time management issue here to deal with. So with that, if you'll proceed.
Madam Chairman, members, Tim Fitzharris representing the Child Development Policy Institute, the Child Development Administrators Association, and PACE. We join the comments that have already been made, particularly of the providers, and won't repeat those. A couple of things, though, that may be of interest to you. On the first issue of estimates, Dion Erner just talked to me about the new flexibility you gave the counties last year in terms of who has to be on CalWORKs and so on. And that has caused the counties to do lots of different things in lots of different counties. That means that we don't know what's happening in Stage 1 and Stage 2. And I would suggest to you that because the counties report quarterly to the State Department of Social Services and the APs report monthly to the Department of Education, it's likely that the information the Department of Education has might be more accurate. Now, I know you're going to probably delay it to that later date when you have the information, but I would suggest that they might have more accurate information right now about what's happening in the counties. On the issue of RMR, the money you're talking about here, $77 million, all but 12% of it is CalWORKs, Stage 2 and 3. And even the 12%, which is the general child care AP, those are the working poor folks who could go probably right now to the front end and go into CalWORKs. They don't want to. So really you're talking about working poor and people on caseloads in the counties. In the other committee, you're going to look at $55 million in Stage 1 of the same issue affected by this RMR proposal. 100% of those people are on CalWORKs and cash aid. So the issue really is to remind the committee that the rules of CalWORKs, if you can't find child care, that you get cash aid and you don't have to work. And we have a work participation requirement that the feds are jumping on us about already. So you've got a situation where the availability is already raised for this committee. And now we have a double whammy for you. That is, you get to pay cash aid, you get no work, you get no credit for work participation, and they are not getting child care. So it's a triple whammy. It doesn't make sense to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Stephen Rhodes. I'm representing Santa Ana and San Bernardino. I'll try to be as quick as I can. On your questions that the chair had on the CLIF chart that was on page 4 of the LAO, I think the most important part about that chart is the fact that it shows that the funding for 10-11 for school districts will be 9.7% lower than the funding for this year. And that's why school districts are suffering. The second issue is the $20 million that you have for new schools. You heard in the race to the top about the need for transportation. There's a number of school districts that are not in transportation. The Auditor General, in their report to the legislature on this issue, recommended that the system be open to those school districts. And so I would also ask that maybe you expand those new schools to districts that want to have a school transportation program. There's probably not a lot out there given the difficult times, but right now they are not allowed to receive a penny for school transportation. On the QEIA issue, I'm interested actually in the QEIA money for this year. It hasn't gone out yet. The legislature and the governor signed a bill in early November. So at some future event, I would, hearing you might want to look into that issue. Why hasn't the money gone out to those schools? It's lovely to hear everybody talk about being concerned about low priority schools, but right now this money hasn't even gone out to those schools.
When would the money, I mean, I know that everything is the exception, so we don't have kind of past precedent. When would the money have normally gone out under?
Well, a couple of years ago, 80% would have gone out July 1st, and then you changed the rules, so it would have gone out, I think, October. The bill was passed in November, early November. So it ought to be out there now. The school districts are basically having to pay the freight by loaning more money, and so it would be important.
Does the Department of Finance know why the money hasn't gone out?
I'd probably have to defer to Department of Education. It has to do, I believe, and you probably need to confirm this with them, with the part of the, there was some follow-up legislation adopted last year after the July budget that tried to allocate some Title I set aside and school intervention grant money for QIA, and the Department of Education was supposed to look at the feasibility of doing that. I believe that's what they've been doing, and that's what they hold up is.
The final issue, I want to emphasize what Monica mentioned and what Estelle mentioned on behalf of the Education Coalition about the importance of the certification. And if you do the governor's proposal that basically makes a mockery out of the system by uncertifying that commitment that you made in July, you basically destroy the commitment that you've made to K-12 education. You destroy the commitment that you made to the people that just talked here in child care, and you destroyed the commitment that you're going to be hearing from on the community college side. This is the single most important issue that's in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, did you have something to say about the QIA payment?
Yeah, we actually have a plan that's due to the legislature next week on this issue.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, Michael Hulsizer here on behalf of the Kern County Superintendent of Schools. We serve 47 school districts, about 170,000 students. Because this is both an overview hearing and the only hearing that this committee will have, I'm going to focus really on one point and make one request. The point is an underscore of what Ms. Lemieux said earlier on behalf of the Ed Coalition, and that's we need to take a step back and take a look at the role Proposition 98 and K-14 has provided in solutions for this legislature and governor in the last year. Since February of 2009, the legislature and governor have enacted $30 billion of solutions. K-14 education has contributed $15 billion of those between ongoing cuts, one-time cuts, and deferrals. We've been 50% of all budget solutions enacted, and we're only 40% of the budget. When you take into consideration the governor's proposal and combine it with last year, we are 45% of all of the budget solutions, and only 40%. Now, as the governor acknowledged in January and the LAO, Mr. Taylor has pointed out very clearly, $7.2 billion of those solutions have not been realized. All $15 billion of the solutions that K-14 education has provided have been realized. So when you back out the $7.2 billion of solutions that haven't been realized, as Ms. Lemieux pointed out earlier, we are 66% of all of the solutions, budget reduction solutions, either that have been enacted or are now proposed. Now, it used to be in this building that we heard people say that Proposition 98 was an example of autopilot spending. I haven't heard that recently. In fact, Proposition 98, as we know, is very elastic, and it's allowed for the legislature and the governor to actually take more from education than any other budget sector. What we're here, I think all of us today, is to ask you as members of this subcommittee and advocates for education, certainly the three of you, is that we remind the full budget committee and the legislature that education, before we ask education to give more, we look back at the $7.2 billion of solutions that weren't realized. We understand these are difficult times and we have to play a fair share. But 66% is not a fair share. So please, that's why we're saying don't manipulate Proposition 98. Just treat it the way it's supposed to be treated. It was designed to be elastic. It's been very fair to you. It's allowed you to cut education. Actually, it's allowed you to cut education more than our fair share. Thanks.
Thank you.
Pam Bachilla on behalf of the Alameda County Office of Education. I want to align myself with the comments of Ms. Henestrosa, Mr. Hulsizer, Ms. Lemieux with the CTA, and I won't belabor the points that they have made that we have been cut and cut and cut in education, and we are hemorrhaging. I just want to focus a little bit on the impact that attempts to manipulate the Prop 98 guarantee have on our organizing efforts in the East Bay. We are working very hard to educate our community about the actual costs of providing high-quality education programs. regardless of what Prop 98 is, what are the costs of providing the kind of programs that we would want for our children that we can be proud of for the children of California? When we continue to see hits taken under the guise of full spending because we're meeting some sort of manipulated Proposition 98 guarantee, it undermines that work. And we're doing that work so that our elected leaders in Sacramento can have courageous conversations about revenues and have some backing in the community and have parents and teachers and educators who are willing to stand up and say, look, this is what it costs to do a good job for our kids, and we want to make sure that we have the funding to cover that. So I would ask you, as did all of my colleagues, please protect the Proposition 98 guarantee. Please don't manipulate any further. And regardless of where Prop 98 is, let's have some conversations about the cost of providing high-quality programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I just know I have 20 minutes to get through another item, too. So if people, I don't, again, wanted to give latitude, but I want to, if you can make your remarks, not repeat remarks that have already been made.
Brad Strong with Children Now. Just want to say that adequate funding for education is critical. I'm trying to condense. And that also on the recommendations for child care, that we support the recommendations to postpone this decision, and just in the end want to make sure that all children have access to a safe, nurturing, early learning environment, and that the providers are fairly reimbursed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Mary Ignatius. I'm the statewide organizer of Parent Voices, and you've heard so eloquently from the providers, and I just wanted to share a story from a parent regarding the RMR reduction, and Parent Voices does ask you to reject this cut. This parent, his name is Jackie Butraigo. She has 3 children, and she's from Assemblymember West Chesbrough District. A couple of years ago, my daughter was attending a center. This had been her first and only child care center. She bonded with her teacher and was there from 2 to 5 years of age, which is 5 years total at the same location. She seemed to feel so safe and secure. I remember feeling comfortable leaving her there while I went to work. There was a confidence about her familiar surroundings. She thrived there and was prepared for kindergarten, and now is an honor student every year. Her center was amazing in that they created a space for her after school to do her homework and would help her if she had questions. She was with children her own age, which she had grown up with and even went to school with. This center would drop her off and pick her up from school, which allowed me to work a full day. One day, the center raised their fees. I didn't know what this would mean for our family until I received a bill. I was already paying a family fee, and now I had to scramble monthly for the other portion, which would be my copay. Eventually, this was no longer affordable. I reduced my hours to work part-time so she would not need to be in daycare. However, during school breaks, there were weeks where she needed care so I could keep working. I had to find something that would be within the ceiling rate. I found a family child care provider that was clear across town. It was fine for a few days here and there, but not as a long-term solution. For instance, like during spring or summer breaks. In her family daycare, she is surrounded by babies and toddlers. She's 9 years old, and if you can imagine a 9-year-old this way, who has different needs than a baby or a toddler. She cannot do her homework or work on school reports and projects at her daycare because the babies want to grab at her books, put them in her mouth, pencils and paper. Not to mention the crying and screaming. The child care provider cannot give her the one-on-one attention because she is hands-on with the little ones who need it. And because of certain licensing rules, Mariah must be where the provider can see her at all times. This is not the ideal situation. Sometimes I think we forget what cuts will do to actual children. What does this mean to little Mariah, who is just 9 years old? Will I have to find another provider? Maybe less quality because that's all I can afford? Would it not be better for her to be in a place where her needs are being met? I am asking and begging for all of you to find other solutions, solutions that do not lie on the backs of children and working families. We are doing our best, and we need you to do yours. And the last thing I just want to add that has not been mentioned is the fact that when the state budget is not passed, child care providers are not paid. This just compounds this, reducing their rates and then not paying them compounds the problem, and like one of the providers said, what is the incentive for them to continue to serve children with subsidies? So please take notice of that. Please reject this cut. Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Khadija Alam on behalf of the Advancement Project. We're a civil rights organization, and I concur with everything that's been said on the K-12 side as well as child care. And I just want to add, these proposed budget cuts in CalWORKs will have dire consequences on working parents and their children who rely on these programs and need it the most. So we ask you to oppose these cuts. Thank you.
Pamela Gibbs with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We also reject any further cuts to Prop 98 as a result of any manipulation. Let me just go over real quickly what juvenile court schools have been asked to do in the past several years. At juvenile halls and camps, as you know, the Division of Juvenile Justice has sent youth to those facilities. We at the county offices of education have to educate these youth through our educational programs. Just last week in a correctional budget hearing, the DJJ staff remarked about their program-rich environment at DJJ. We, however, at the local level, have been cut year after year, and I won't repeat what's been stated before. We need equity in the system to provide the similar services that are required for those youth at the local level through county offices of education. Further cuts to those programs will not only result in a higher rate of pupils going to state prison, but will not help the recidivism efforts that the state has been trying to achieve. So please reject any further cuts to Prop 98. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair. I'm Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. As complicated as the Prop 98 issue is, the community partners that we work with get it. And we, along with our coalition that we work with, Parents and Students for Great Schools, which is PICO, ACE, CFJ, and also Youth Together in Bay Area Parent Leadership Action Network. We wrote a letter also to the Secretary of Education asking him to carefully look at our state's maintenance of effort waiver request, as well as our Fiscal Stabilization Fund application, and hold it up until the state does more to meet its maintenance of effort requirement. As our health and human services budgets are gutted, the poorest students need more, not less, to succeed in their education, and we're concerned that California jeopardizes this federal stimulus funding by the Prop 98 maneuvers. Poll after poll says that voters and respondents think that the education budget should not be cut even further, and we urge and we expect to all work together to do our best to raise revenue so that we can prevent that from happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any final questions for members?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing so much time also for people to make statements. First of all, as a member of this committee, and for a few years now, even serving under Madam Chair when she was chairing this committee, I have to apologize to all of those that find it necessary again to come up to Sacramento to defend funding at the 85th percentile, to try to explain the value of and the contribution of K through 14 education and what that brings to the state. And I just wanted to just make this very brief statement that it is time where during this budget crisis where we're going to have to address the question of essential services and the value of those services and the cost to the state for not providing those services. We can no longer just sort of blindly go forward and have a discussion about cutting and reducing services without talking about the consequences of it. Or we're not going to be able to value those services. And it's pretty clear that if you are turning our system upside down by all the negative impacts by not funding and contributing to broken families, contributing to children that are not receiving care, and the consequences to our state, you cannot avoid cost to children. You cannot avoid it. It's going to pop up in the system somewhere. So you either do it through constructive effort, or it's going to pop up in the juvenile justice system, or it's going to pop up somewhere else. And so it's just very frustrating that the administration would come forward with these proposals without any fair acknowledgement that the state just has to get more revenue. We have to identify more revenue to take care of essential services if we're going to have any state worth living in. So anyway, it's just very frustrating to me, and my hope is that we will have a genuine bipartisan discussion among those people that really support taking care of our children and educating our children so that this state stands for something. And I believe that the people in the state of California support this position. They do it every time. They support, the special funding requests in school districts all over the state and in counties all over the state. And so I understand the priority, but it takes us to have courage to not pass these costs on and stand up and say that we're going to fund these services for our children. And it's just we have run out of time to play games, to use smoke and mirrors. Now it's time for us to be legislators and to come up with real solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. And you express the sentiment of many of us. And what I really appreciate is your persistent and consistent message around that, because I think we don't have a quality discussion without understanding what the ramifications are and what the costs are by not making investments in education, child care, and others. And so thank you for continuing to bring that to the foreground for us to realize the importance of doing that. So thank you. And now we have about 10 minutes to go, and we have two higher ed items that are also important. So we will move to item 6870, issue number 3, career technical education. And Mr. Boylard from the Legislative Analyst's Office will present. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve Boylard, the Legislative Analyst. In the interest of time, I'll just focus on, looks like page 8 of your agenda. You have an item on career technical education. You may recall that in the current year, you created a flex item. There were a number of reductions made to categorical programs. You created a flex item that contains about 12 categoricals that allows, similar to the K-12 flex item. The governor proposes for a current year change to move career technical education out of that flex item and protect it as a separate categorical. So generally, I think there had been some acknowledgement when you were creating the flex item that districts required some measure of flexibility to contend with reductions that were being made. However, there were some categoricals that you left outside of the flex item, recognizing there were some priorities you wanted to ensure were funded at particular levels. So this would be a policy call on your part in whether you want to protect career technical education by moving that categorical out of the flex item in the current year. And just, you will also be facing this as a budget year issue because the governor proposes some additional changes in and out of the flex item for the budget year.
Thank you. Mr. Hanson from the Department of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a bit of history. At the end of conference committee last year, the $20 million that had been in the main local assistance item for the last few years was eliminated. Subsequent discussions to the conference committee, there was an agreement that the CTE funding and QEIA was going to be shifted into the local assistance item. It was our understanding and expectation that that money would retain its purpose, that it was CTE money when it was QEIA, and that would be CTE money when it was in the main local assistance item. All we're asking is that there be clarification to the current trailer bill, current year trailer bill, and current year budget bill language, that it be specified that this money retain its original purpose and only be used for CTE money and not be in the flexibility.
So is this fair to say that this is another issue of confusion about interpretation of, okay, all righty. So I just, I guess one just general question before the public comment is that because there is confusion, I don't know what community colleges have exercised during this current year, but to sort of change mid-year on this seems like it could cause some problems. And just wondering if anybody can comment on that.
Sure. I'm Eric Skinner with the California Community Colleges, and this is one of the more confusing features of the community college budget that was enacted. I think Mr. Hansen's comments kind of speak to some of the confusion. How we've handled that, it's really left the Chancellor's Office in an awkward spot dealing with an ambiguous legal situation. How we've proceeded is to proceed with treating the funds as restricted, focused on career technical education. We thought that would be the best way to proceed until we received this clarification from the legislature. Given the focus, the legislature when our budget was cut, colleges were asked to protect CTE courses, basic skills courses, and transfer courses. These dollars will help to protect those CTE courses that we were asked to protect.
And what do you advocate for?
We support the adoption of the governor's proposal to clarify that the funds are indeed targeted for CTE.
Thank you.
A question related to your question, Madam Chair, it would be not only what's the effect of doing it now, but why is it being proposed now? In other words, why is it part of this mid-year? And what we are led to believe is that the urgency of action for us to act on the mid-year budget items, it has to do with the imbalance in the budget and trying to accomplish revenue. So this seems like this is an important policy item to consider. I'm just asking the question of why we would be doing it as part of this process.
Just the administration believes that maintaining CTE is critically important. We want to dedicate those funds to CTE.
We're in the middle of the academic year, right?
Yes, but the funds have not gone out yet. Traditionally, they go out in February and March. So if we can get it in a trailer bill now to clean it up, I think it would be in a timely manner.
Okay. Public comments.
Jonathan Lightman on behalf of both the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges and the California Community Colleges Association for Occupational Education. We support the move from the flexible to the inflexible side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Reed Milburn, President of the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. We also support the move to the we support that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Patrick Ainsworth, Assistant Superintendent with the California Department of Education. We strongly support this. SB 70 was intended to support CTE programs in both K-12 and the community college level, and it's doing that. To get to the point, if this language is in there, there's in danger of losing $2 million from the K-12 side for support of CTE programs. So we're very concerned that we have an approved Department of Finance plan for the expenditure of this, a 5-year plan. We believe it's a sound plan. It's about systemic change across both systems, moving kids from K-12 to higher paying jobs that they get trained in at the community college level. So I think it's something that's needed to clarify, and we want to see it enacted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from members? Questions? I think this one is while there's confusion, it's a pretty straightforward issue. But let's go on and go on to the issue number 4, which is around the suspension of new competitive Cal Grant awards.
Madam Chair, Steve Boiler again. This is really one of the few budget solutions in the governor's budget in higher education for the budget year. Again, this would create $45.5 million of savings in the budget year by suspending the awarding of any new competitive Cal Grants. Technically, the trailer bill language would make this competitive Cal Grant program dependent upon funding being provided in the budget. Right now, it's just regularly, you have 22,500 of these awards would be available each year. The governor would say you wouldn't do that in the budget year. Students currently receiving Cal Grants, competitive Cal Grants, would continue to receive them, but no new students would. Earlier, again, in the interest of time, I cut out testimony on the overall higher education budget, providing you with that kind of context. But the one thing I would mention is for the budget year, the governor would be, as he touted in a State of the State message, putting a lot of extra investment in higher education, including about $800 million at UC and CSU, smaller augmentation of the community colleges, and he would be funding the Cal Grant entitlement program. But this is the one area that he would slate for a cut, $45.5 million. We think there are better ways for you to come up with that $45.5 rather than stopping providing this critical aid to your students, particularly at a time that student fees are rising in all three segments.
Let me ask you a question. President Obama has also indicated that he wants to invest in higher education, particularly in the area of Pell Grants and putting more money into Pell Grants. So Pell Grants wouldn't cover students that can compete for these particular Cal Grant awards would not be able. They wouldn't be candidates for Pell Grant awards, or would they?
I believe it depends on the student, but I believe they would. Generally, the competitive Cal Grants are received by students who have much lower income than even your regular Cal Grant entitlement program. So in terms of financial need, these students are certainly needy. The Pell Grant program, as you acknowledge, the award sizes increase. That is a general stipend that students can make use of. You would need to be able to demonstrate need under the FAFSA, and again, as long as you had additional costs other than what would be covered by the Cal Grant competitive, you could still receive the Pell. So it's really a packaging issue.
But it's not. The Pell Grants are agnostic on age.
I believe so. The Cal Grant, yes, the Cal Grant entitlement program does have some limitations on it. The Pell Grant program would be available to students irrespective of their age.
Great. Department of Finance?
Yeah, Brian Storm with the Department of Finance. Just a couple of points. The reason why you're seeing this issue right now is obviously the administration's proposal is to try to give it as much advance warning as we can to potential recipients of this grant that that this money would not be available to them under our proposal. So that's why you'd be seeing in the special session some sort of language that would say to that extent that the program is suspended for the coming year. A couple of things that we wanted to point out was that this is a tough budget time, and budget year is going to be just as hard as the current year. We made a tough decision on this one. We understand that there are many, many needy people who would benefit from this program, but it's just a tough call. And we're electing to choose this one because there is some duplication with the existing community college transfer Cal Grant entitlement program. There is some overlap there. It's not a perfect fit, but there is some overlap there. And also, too, if we were to come up with another option, I don't know if the LAO is going to go into any specifics about their alternatives, but if you were to say go in and try to make a change in the entitlement Cal Grant A or Bs, we think that there's a little bit more risk that you're exposed to there legally because obviously there's this precedent set that if you have a certain GPA and meet these certain thresholds, you're going to be getting a Cal Grant. With the competitive, it's always been conditioned that, well, this is based on how much money's in the budget, and there's only a set number of students. So we felt when it comes down to the legal risk and legal exposure that this program is, although it's unfortunate, it is a better option. And in terms of, I think we touched about it. You touched on it a little bit about the Pell Grants. The competitive program isn't just as the standalone option that students have. There are many other options. There's student loans. There's Board of Governors waivers at the community colleges because most of these students are attending community colleges for the most part. There's lots and lots of other options there. And on top of that, we have still the lowest, by far and above the lowest community college rates in the entire country. So there are other options out there, and it's unfortunate that we have to go this route, but the fiscal situation is the way that it is.
Now, this doesn't just affect community colleges. This is for students in all three systems, right?
That's correct. But but my point is that basically 3/4 of the students do go to community colleges.
Okay.
And can we hear from the Student Aid Commission?
Thank you. Janet McDuffie with the California Student Aid Commission. First, I'd like to thank the committee for their ongoing support of our Cal Grant and other commission financial aid programs. The Commission continues to believe that the competitive Cal Grant Awards are an important resource for older, returning, non-traditional students who might not otherwise be eligible for student financial aid for their undergraduate education or training. We provided you with a fact sheet on the competitive Cal Grant program for our 2008-9 year. The competitive Cal Grant Awards are similar to the entitlement awards in that there are two main programs, the Cal Grant A and the Cal Grant B program. The average competitive student is 30 years old, has a GPA of 3.28 and a family income of less than $15,000. In the 2008-9 award year, over 162,000 students met the financial and basic eligibility criteria for the program. It's a 16% growth from the prior 2 years. However, with the current program limit of 22,500 awards, only 1 out of every 6 of the qualified students receive awards. 71% of the awards are provided to students attending community colleges, 14% are at private career colleges, 9% at CSU, and 3% each at UC and the Independents. With California facing a shortage of nearly 1 million college graduates to meet the need of the workforce, if students cannot attend college this fall, they would face the worst job market in the nation. In a time when the future job market depends on higher skills, the demand of financial aid for California students will lead to higher unemployment, greater pressure on the state budget, and erosion of our quality of life. Receipt of the Cal Grant Program award significantly increases a student's likelihood of persisting to 4 years of college. The Commission understands that in addition to suspending the competitive Cal Grant program for 2010-11, the Governor is proposing trailer bill language to make the new competitive Cal Grant subject to the Budget Act. The Governor has proposed various reductions to the Cal Grant programs over the last few years. However, the Legislature has been able to analyze those proposals and make its own decisions during its public hearing process. The Commission recognizes this normal budget process and notifies potential Cal Grant Award recipients that their awards are tentative and subject to potential revisions in the budget. And although we have not seen any of the specific trailer bill language, we caution you to accept any language that would give the Governor more control of the budget process.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this compilation of data, too. We appreciate that. Any questions?
Could I clarify just one point for you? In addition to this, the Governor's proposal does include some further cuts to the Cal Grant program under his so-called trigger cuts, which are perhaps looking fairly likely. So I'm not sure what kind of legal risk the Department of Finance is talking about in making changes to the entitlement program, but certainly that's the Governor's proposal under his trigger cuts. In addition, you have the same timing issue. The Department of Finance, I would agree that you'd want to give maximum notification to students on any changes to the program. The Governor's trigger cuts, which could happen later on, would make those same kind of changes to the budget year under the entitlement program.
Well, it sounds like the Student Aid Commission is making some a warning, I guess, to letters that are going out.
Yes, we have traditionally do that.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Reed Milburn again with the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. 77% of the new Cal Grant Award recipients are community college students. This also makes up only 1/3 of the total cost. These are our neediest students that often don't have other avenues of financial aid available to them, so we encourage you please to protect these. We appreciate the Governor's proposal to protect higher education, but we think that Cal Grants need to be protected, all of them.
Thank you. Next.
Teresa Tennant with the Community College League of California. We represent the CEOs and trustees of our 72 community college districts. We recognize this is a tough fiscal environment, and we recognize these are non-98 general fund resources. But you know, this competitive Cal Grant program is targeted at some of our students who have. This cut would be targeted at some of our students who have higher GPAs and lower incomes than students who receive the entitlement Cal Grant program. And so these are older, non-traditional students, and student affordability is a huge issue for our students. Many of our students work, part-time, full-time while they're attending classes, and to the extent that we can make it easier for students to address affordability issues, that will increase the likelihood that our students will be able to achieve their educational goals, be it transfer, certificate. I think it's important that people recognize that in this era when we're looking at access and trying to maintain access, that we also think about student success. And this is a program that would allow students to be successful in their academic pursuit.
Thank you very much.
Jonathan Lightman on behalf of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges. I mean, the only comment that I would have to add to the long list of opposition is that when we look at what's going on at the community college now, and we see folks coming from UC and CSU can no longer afford, and our traditional students are being squeezed out, and we need to make room for our non-traditional students, for our older students, for those who've just been laid off and they want to get back in the workforce, and they are the working poor, and they're trying to do more with less. This is the worst message you could send to them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad Hardison. I'm the representing the California Community College Student Financial Aid Administrators. I'm a financial aid administrator at Santa Barbara City College. Just address a couple points. The Pell Grant is going up each year, but it's only a couple $100, so it's not the same amount that we're talking about cutting Cal Grants for. This issue keeps coming up every year, and we've seen no policy issue for why this competitive Cal Grants is targeted as a cut. It's not the same students as the transfer entitlement students. Those are many students who are being transferred out. As you heard, most of the competitive Cal Grants are happening at the community college. Those students are using those while they're at community college. And so we don't see this as a duplication of effort, and this is not the way to go about making savings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Maximilian Rosa. I'm not only a student at a California Community College here in Sacramento, but I also work there. And I've seen the influx of people who are returning workforce, who've been laid off of their jobs, who are dependent on their education and don't have the means to provide for themselves. I personally would not be able to afford to go to college if I didn't have this financial support from the state. I'm currently right now 21, transferring, working 30 hours a week, taking 20 units and supporting my 72-year-old grandmother and helping her pay her mortgage. So I'm completely dependent on this. And the gentleman asked earlier, are these essential services? They are essential. And the value of these services is the future of the state of California. If we don't prepare people who are not only young but non-traditional older students to take over now and evolve into leadership positions, we won't be able to continue on as a state. We will end up in a crash, so to speak. And the cost of not handling this is the future of the state of California. We wouldn't be able to maintain the status of California that's known worldwide. And I wanted to thank you for allowing me to speak, and I want to urge you to not cut the funding for the Cal Grant program, because it is vitally important to myself and thousands of other students and individuals across the state. Thank you.
Thank you for being here to testify.
Pam Bachilla on behalf of the Western Association of College Admissions Counselors. The students can describe better than I can how incredibly difficult it is to be a non-traditional older student trying to work and go to school at night and make it all fit together. The recipients of the Cal Grant Competitive Award are by far our most disadvantaged. We would urge that they not be the targets for these reductions.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to speak. My name is Alex Pater. I'm a member of the Student Senate for California Community Colleges. I also attend Sacramento State University. And firstly, I'm missing a class because right now to be at this hearing, and this class has been furloughed 50% for the first 6 weeks, so I'm missing my entire class this week to speak here. Cal Grants allow people with that are most disadvantaged to have the same opportunities as the people that do have those advantages. Cal Grants allow people that have less advantages to have the opportunity to go to college. We need to support our students both inside and outside the classroom. Without supporting our students outside the classroom, their success is extremely diminished and will not allow them to help our further community by allowing them to be involved in participate in the job requirements of the future. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. My name is Henry Giron, and I am a Sacramento State University student. I am a recipient to this, to this award for, for my owning my GPA, but I'm not a non-traditional student too. I'm one of those cases that I work in the morning and I go to school at night. Many times have I asked myself, it would have been easier to quit, to not given the same opportunities if these awards were not given to me. We look now and we're cutting down on a lot of these awards, cutting on students. Yes, we do have options besides the grants, the loans, but it's not enough. We have tremendous amount of students who do have the GPA, who do have made the amount to make it, but because of funds, they're not allowed to receive these awards. I'm one of those students. I'm fighting in the same way as just Alex Pater just spoke earlier. I have a class in about 40 minutes. But I'd rather be here because I want you to hear from my perspective on what it takes and for you, what it takes for you to understand that I'm suffering here just like many students are. I wish it would be easier to have a lot of my teammates who are on the debate team with me are receiving these awards. They're giving back to the universities. They're going out of their own ways on the weekends to compete, to provide and say, we are CSU students. Yes, we don't go to these fancy UC schools or private schools, but we're so proud that we go to these schools to represent. But in the backlash, we're not getting paid for all this. We're not being taken care of. So I ask you briefly as a board member is to look at my story, look at the stories that have been told before me, that not to suspend these competitive awards, because we live and thrive off these awards. These are the backbones to gives us the opportunity to survive. If we're not giving these awards, the most essential things that we need as people are taken away. If we don't have these, then we don't have the opportunity to work in we would have to work extra hours just to make up the back from it. So I'm asking you, board members, to reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think you still have time to get to class.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, thank you. Next.
Hello, I'm Christopher Berry, and I am the student rights advocate at Mendocino College in Mendocino County. I'm here today because my school is in an economically depressed area, and so many of our students are single parents and displaced workers, non-traditional students like myself, who have really felt the brunt of the economic downturn. And we've returned to college looking for a way to continue to be responsible and productive members of society. We're continuing to invest in our state's future, and we're determined, very determined. And it concerns me that, we cut financial aid. It doesn't just affect college students, it affects entire communities. And this money is actually very important in Ukiah and Mendocino County. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Eric Skinner with the Chancellor's Office of the California Community Colleges, and I'd simply echo the concerns that the previous speakers have shared. These competitive Cal Grants, while they represent a very small sliver of the Cal Grant program in total, make a huge difference to the community college students who receive them. This proposal would result in roughly 18,000 students this next year not getting awards. Very likely many of those students won't be able to afford to attend college without them. This program, as has been noted before, 3/4 of the awards go to community college students. It makes a big difference to us. And so I passed around a fact sheet with some additional detail. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your written comments. We appreciate it.
One last comment. My name is Olga Delia Ramirez. I'm with the California State Student Association. And I just wanted to point out that basically what this comes down to is suspending the new competitive Cal Grant awards is less students attending higher education within the CSU community colleges and UC. And when there's less students, that means there's less, less students that we're graduating into the workforce. And as you know, that we need more educated people in the workforce. And so we like to say at the California State Student Association, California is made in the CSU, and we ask you to invest for not only for us, for students, but for California's future economy. We believe we are the solution. So thank you, and thank you for listening to the comments today.
Thank you very much. And seeing no more questions, any closing?
I would just say, of course, she's about to say something eloquent again, but I'd just say, I would stipulate that the eloquent comments made earlier by my colleague apply every bit as much to this situation as the previous item. So,
Mr. Swanson?
Madam Chair, thank you for the hearing. I just hope that as we go forward that we pay very close attention to the important synergies that are developed here. And it is, in fact, that if we are denying 10,000 students admission to our state universities system, then obviously that puts pressure on our community college system. And so it's a need for us to actually spend more money on our community college system out of recognition that we have a commitment to education. So so we have to fund those parts of the system that obviously are receiving additional pressure because of the recession and because of the budget impacts that we put in place over the last couple of years. So I just hope that we take more of a thoughtful approach to this budgeting. And some of these suggestions, appear to be almost unreal, frankly. I mean, that this House would actually suspend this opportunity. And I just would hope that we spend more time coming up with very realistic approaches to this crisis than some of these approaches, which I just can't believe are serious. And we have to take them seriously, and we have to act upon them. But I think we have a lot of work in front of us.
One other last thought, Madam Chair. I had a hearing the other day in my select committee on the impacts of some of the developmental disabilities cuts, and the term kept coming up, cumulative impacts. So when you take the low-income working people of the state who are trying to get ahead, and we heard child care earlier, for example, these are the same folks, who are struggling with cuts at all levels and trying to make do. So there's a combination of many, many things that are coming down at once. And I think we need to take that into account. It's not, we take these things one at a time in the budgetary process, but with the individuals who are affected, it is cumulative.
Thank you for those comments. And I think obviously we're not going to take any action here today. I think it's been a very enlightening meeting. I really want to thank everyone who participated in the meeting. We've spent the last 3 hours and 20 minutes. I think it was a very good time well spent. And again, I appreciate all who have come to join us, and to particularly the people who came to testify at this meeting. And with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.